listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It's the Yes, No, Never show this evening. Shamima Begum, should she be allowed back into the United Kingdom? The ISIS bride who ran away from East London and joined the head-chopping, throat-cutting extremists of ISIS. And taking the knee. For how long are we going to do this? Why is it so unpopular with so many football fans? Would it be racist now to stop it? And just 21 days after being elected by one vote as the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, the leader has gone. Do they have another one? What are the implications for the peace process in Ireland? And are we headed back to trouble, beginning with a long, hot summer of marching? And happy Father's Day to those of you lucky enough to be a father or to have known your father, still alive or passed away. This is a day, isn't it, to remember your dad? It was for me. I hope it was for you. Sit back, put your seatbelt on. It's going to be a bumpy ride because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Somebody asked me just before the show if we should do a poll on whether or not it was time to rename Father's Day. Get out of here, I told them. Why would you rename it? Well, St. Paul's Girls' School has decided to abandon the title of head girl for the top of the school. There's no apparent explanation for why you would go on calling your school a girls' school, but you can't have a head girl. The authorities in the school said that it was not sufficiently sensitive to the non-binary, although 99% of the girls in the school defined themselves as girls. This wokery is everywhere. How could anyone object to Father's Day? Well, some, it seems, do. Maybe you are amongst them, in which case we'd be delighted to hear you. Now, this is, of course, the mother of all talk shows. It is, of course, the biggest show of its kind in the entire world, with more than 1 million people watching, never mind listening, on the various platforms on which this show is going out. If you are in the Washington, D.C. area, you can listen in crystal clarity on FM 105.5 FM. If you're across the United States, you can listen on AM from Burning City to Burning City. And if you are around the world, you can listen on SputnikNews.com. If you're amongst the million that watch, you can watch on my Facebook, on RT's multiple Facebook pages, on my YouTube channel, or RT's multiple YouTube channels, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram. No, I think not Instagram this evening because my good wife can't be with me and no one is filming it for Instagram. But so many platforms. On my Telegram channel, of course, is a growing one. Twitch is a growing one, but Twitter is the fastest growing portal for this show. However you're consuming it, it's a lot better than what you'll be watching on GB News. I'm the only person in this entire studio, and there's a lot of us, many of them volunteers, but a lot of us. And I'm the only person that thinks GB News will succeed, and that the teething troubles that have lasted longer than normal teething troubles will in the end be surmounted. But it will remain an enduring mystery why a channel with scores of millions of pounds invested in it is so technically a dog's breakfast, especially by comparison to us, who've got a laughable, or cryable if you're me, budget for the mother of all talk shows. This show has no technical hitches. Oh! But seriously, I want to talk about GB News and the reason why I think it will be a success. Because there's a big audience out there that wants an end to wokery, wants an end to being endlessly proselytized at over whatever the latest liberal fad is. I think there are tens of millions of such people in Britain. Whether there were or weren't, wokery would still leave me cold, but I don't feel lonely in my detestation of the tendency of the so-called progressives, so-called liberals, so-called left, to lecture everyone around them in every possible way, to anathematize them. That's an important word. To place them beyond the pale at the first whiff of an incorrect pronoun, at the first whiff of incorrect vocabulary, iconography, language. I think there are scores of millions of people in Britain and in the United States who are tired of all that. Now, ontology is important. Look it up. Ontology is important, but it's a science. It's not something you slap with a broad brush, which is precisely what happens here in this country. Let me give you a personal example. I woke up this morning to literally hundreds of tweets. Trending I have been for the last 24, maybe 48 hours, calling me far right. Now, that will come as a surprise to anyone with an actual brain, rather than someone programmed by the literati, commentariat, the woke brigades. How someone like me, born in a slum, brought up in a council house, going to work at the age of 17 in a factory, joining the Transport and General Workers Union and still being in it 50 years later, joining the Labour Party at 13, being called all kinds of left-wing names almost all of my life, being a disciple of Tony Benn, God rest his soul, for all of my life with him and weeping at his funeral. It will come as a surprise to some that hundreds of people now appear to think that I am far right. God knows what that means for the rest of you. Now, this nomenclature is false, but it is the weapon of first resort of those who disagree with this political position or that. And if that's what they're calling me, what are they calling you? The so-called left, liberals, I call them, in the so-called Labour Party and around about it, quite a lot of them have been expelled by the very people they're now supporting against me. They think that anyone one step to the right of them, they think to the right of them, is far right. And anyone 2 steps to the right of them is a fascist. I had the dubious privilege of sitting down and having tea with the loathsome Owen Jones of The Guardian this week. It wasn't the most pleasant couple of hours, although even he had to concede that, hey, I'm quite popular actually in the place where he was interviewing me. And I said to him, you are part of Labour's problem. In fact, quite a big part, because you have led the way You and people like you have led the way in the anathematization of the British working class because they don't think like you, talk like you, because they don't dress like you, because their social and cultural norms are not the same as you. You have blackguarded them, anathematized them, driven them beyond the pale, and they have concluded that people like you don't like them very much, and they are heartily reciprocating. And that is actually the Labour Party's fundamental problem in this country, and it's the Democratic Party's problem in the United States with scores of millions of Americans. You see, you're not far right if you don't like being lectured to by Hillary Clinton. You're not far right if you don't like the European Union and you don't like being governed from Brussels. You're not far right if you didn't like the hypocrite Barack Obama. That doesn't make you a part of a basket of deplorables. And the more you call people deplorables, far right, and all the isms and obes that are handed out, showered like confetti on everyone that disagrees with you, begin to dislike you more and more. Now, I have spent countless hours over the last few weeks on poor, windswept, neglected, left behind, taken for granted housing estates who never get a visit from the Owen Joneses that teem throughout the Labour Party these days, and also the Democratic Party, I have no doubt. But I visit them because, coming from where I come from and thinking the way I do, I can walk and talk amongst them very happily indeed. I've been searching for the reasons for this onslaught today, calling me far right. Now, I joke, I'm a straight white male. Maybe that's it. I'm married. Maybe that's it. I've got 6 children. Maybe that's it. I'm a Roman Catholic. Maybe that's it. I don't have liberal views. I'm not a liberal, never have been a liberal. Maybe that's it. But I am economically the most radical person you're ever likely to meet. Trust me, I really mean it when I say I want a revolution in the way our economy and society is run. I have the most radical set of foreign policy views of anybody that you are ever likely to meet. And regular viewers and listeners already know many of them. But that means I'm far right for the liberal, politically correct police force which has grown up in this country. Now back to GB News. GB News is catering to the people who have equally been written off, called a basket of deplorables, called racists, even fascists, because we didn't like the European Union and campaigned to withdraw from it, because we think an issue about personal pronouns is utterly laughable. I see the Law Society of Britain just joined in today. They've produced a booklet to tell lawyers throughout the land how to be more careful about pronouns, just in case the odd person coming to sit in their lawyer's office is a man thinking that he's a woman, or wanting you to think that he is a woman. The Law Society. Are there no other issues for the Law Society to be occupying their time and resource on than this kind of balderdash? Apparently not. Now, as I say, there are many millions of people who are tired of the BBC ramming their liberal, woke, political and social and cultural agenda down their throats. if I'm tired of that, what about the people on the estates that I've been tramping around endlessly over the last few weeks? Just think about that. You see, when you're in democratic politics, you can't live in an imagined country. You can't live in the future. You have to live now in the country you've got. Too many people on the so-called left take the view that Bertolt Brecht satirized when writing about East Germany, when he said the party had lost confidence in the people and had decided to elect a new one. You have to work and live. You have to ply your political trade amongst the people who are actually here. Not in Wokeland, or in Venezuela, or in Palestine, or in Cuba. You have to live with the British people. You have to persuade the American people of the correctness of the political direction that you are trying to set, and ask people to follow you down. That's got that off my chest. You can tell that I'm wounded by being called far right. The funny thing is, most of these memes were accompanied by a picture of me and Nigel Farage on the campaign trail for Brexit, for which more people voted than have ever voted for anybody or anything in the entire history of this country. They think that picture loses me votes. But actually, in the aforementioned estates, in which many tens of thousands of voters live, that picture is a vote winner. And so the last laugh might be on them. We'll know soon enough. Tonight we're going to be talking about Northern Ireland and the crisis which is upon us, with the resignation in record quick time. Be interesting to see if any party leader has ever lasted less than 21 days. Why is that important to the rest of the country and indeed the rest of the world? Well, it will be if Northern Ireland goes up in flames and if the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, comes crashing down over the price of sausages and chilled meat in the supermarkets in Northern Ireland. We'll be talking about taking the knee. This is another casualty of the woke brigade. Everybody, apparently, who thinks the taking of the knee has gone on long enough, and adulation of George Floyd and capital B, capital L, capital M is not a good idea, they too are denounced as far right. But if that's true, a significant proportion of Britain's football fans just fell into your basket of deplorables. And we'll be talking about Shamima Begum, who as a child, she was a child, ran away to Syria to join the ISIS. Now she's a captive and a mother and asking to come home. We'll be asking your point. There we are on the poll now. Should Shamima Begum be allowed back to the UK? A, yes. B, no. C, charged on arrival. That's for you to answer. I'll be talking to experts on all of these subjects over the next 2.5 hours or so. Here's my first question of the evening. It's a good one, actually, and think before you answer it. In 1840, Samuel Morse, the man who gave his name to Morse code, patented his telegraph machine. What was the first coded message he sent? Was it A, what hath God wrought? B, tempus fugit? C, burger and fries? The results when you come back.
Radio Sputnik.
ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We need to acclimatise the public for the introduction of extraterrestrials, because come to the conclusion at this point, if they're going to come, they are going to come soon.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, they actually saw the saucer land in front of them or pass by in New York or go overhead.
It went in front of my eyes up and turned into what looked like a star way up in the sky.
They said the same line that you just made, and it was amazing. It is an awful waste of space if we are all that there is.
If we're all that there is. Exactly. Have you ever seen any of these phenomena?
I have seen energy entities. One looked like a massive jellyfish. The other one looked like a massive centipede.
Well, you had me up to that point. Now I just think you're stark raving mad.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you still allowed to say stark raving mad? I'm not so sure, but I say it anyway. Now, Samuel Morse. He clearly didn't say burger and fries because it was in 1840. But he might have said tempus fugit, and he might have said, what hath God wrought? But the answer was indeed A, what hath God wrought? Now wrought is W-R-O-U-G-H-T, of course. Now here are the phone numbers. If you're calling from the United Kingdom, and remember, it's completely free to call us on 08081 965522. 08081 965522. And if you're in the United States, it's also what they call toll-free. So it will cost you nothing at all to call the show. It's +1 844 944 3344. And you can email the show anytime at onair@moats.tv. You can also, of course, send us tweets, as many people are, on @George Galloway, @RT UK News. We've got, I think, hundreds of responses to the poll, should Shamima Begum be allowed back to the UK? A, yes, B, no, C, charged on arrival. And I'll read some of those in the course of the show. Now, you may remember, he was an excellent guest, actually, just a few weeks ago. Professor Jonathan Tong, Professor of Politics at the University of Liverpool and co-author of the book, The Democratic Unionist Party, From Protest to Power, on the DUP. Now, when he was last on, he was explaining the runners and riders for the leadership of the DUP. The candidate that I thought would be the wisest pick for them, Jeffrey Donaldson, narrowly lost. The man who won, Edwin Poote, it's not a great name for a political leader. And anyway, they didn't put up with him for very long. He's gone in 21 days. And Professor Tong's here to explain what on earth is happening and, Jonathan, what it all means for the rest of us. Of course, we care what it means for Northern Ireland, but what does it mean for the rest of us? Thanks for joining us. Is it a record, Professor? 21 days in power?
It's almost a record, and it is a record for Northern Irish politics. 504 hours in the job was all that Edwin Poote was given. As you indicated in your introduction, George, it was a mistake for Edwin Poote to be elected leader of the DUP. The better choice would have been Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, with more political acumen, and it may well be now, ironically, that the runner-up in a two-horse race, Geoffrey Donaldson, becomes leader of the DUP. In terms of where it went wrong for Edwin Poote, when he got rid of Arlene Foster as DUP leader in what was a pretty brutal political assassination, then you have to have a new First Minister of Northern Ireland. So Edwin Poots had to nominate his friend, Paul Given, as new First Minister of Northern Ireland last week. But when you do that in Northern Ireland, a new Deputy First Minister has to be nominated at the same time. Sinn Féin has the right to nominate the Deputy First Minister, and Sinn Féin's price for supporting the DUP's choice of Paul Given was to demand implementation of Irish language provision, which was agreed 15 years ago, re-agreed at the beginning of last year, and Sinn Féin said, look, this has to be now implemented. And the British government agreed that it would be implemented if Stormont wasn't going to do it by October of this year. The problem was that Poots did not sign that off with his party. He agreed this. His party said, oh, well, hang on a minute, we're not having this. And by 9 o'clock the same evening, Poots was gone as leader after a mere 3 weeks in charge. And now, obviously, the DUP is quickly to appoint a new leader. And what you've got in place in Northern Ireland is a First Minister, Paul Given, who does not have the confidence of his own party, and they want him to resign as First Minister as soon as a new party leader is sorted out.
By any metric, that is a real dog's breakfast. Let's examine it more closely. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, if he now becomes by default the leader of the DUP, is of course a Westminster MP. I sat with him for many years, travelled many places in his company, know him quite well. He'll have to nominate one of his friends for First Minister, and it won't presumably be the one that Mr. Poot nominated. So who might that be?
Correct. Paul Given would not be Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's first choice as First Minister. He wouldn't be his second choice, and probably not his third choice either. The only thing he might consider is to try and reunite the DUP, which is tearing itself apart in not just a civil war, but civil wars. You could keep Paul Given on just to try and reunite the party, but I think that's unlikely. And, you know, it's not a party that is awash with talent that you can impose as First Minister. So I think he'll be scratching his head. He'll be desperate to try and come back from Westminster, go from Westminster to Stormont, and that means someone standing aside so that Geoffrey Donaldson can have a safe berth in Northern Ireland and then put himself in as First Minister. But in the meantime, yeah, he has to find someone, and there's no name that jumps out. It was even rumoured at one point that Arlene Foster could be reinstated, but I think that's really unlikely. I suspect she's probably off to the House of Lords, but you wouldn't completely rule it out now, given that this is, you know, it's almost pay-per-view stuff, this. It's such a falling apart of a party in such dramatic circumstances.
Well, as Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. But I don't suppose it's a laughing matter over there.
No, it's not, because it is a volatile time for Northern Ireland, and Stormont is teetering on collapse. And you might think, well, when is it not a volatile time in Northern Ireland, and when is Stormont not on the verge of collapse? Because it has been collapsed 40% of the time since powers were devolved after the Good Friday Agreement. Powers were given in December 1999. It's chronically unstable, the power sharing arrangement at Stormont. But, you know, these are dangerous times because loyalists, you know, were rioting only in April. Only a couple of months ago, there was serious disorder in Belfast. They haven't got a political outlet at the moment because of the DUP meltdown. The DUP also being blamed for the trade border in the Irish Sea that has divided Great Britain and Northern Ireland in economic terms. So loyalist politics are very, very volatile. They're in a real state of flux, and there's no clear political outlet for those protests. That's what makes this situation dangerous in one sense. And the other is that the future of power sharing in Northern Ireland, you know, that's the centrepiece of the Good Friday Agreement. There is a section, I think, of the DUP that is thinking about walking away from power sharing. If there was to be an election tomorrow, and there has to be an assembly election by next May anyway, the DUP will lose the first ministership crown to Sinn Féin. And the question begged from that is, would the DUP come back into the institutions, the other side of an election, operating in reduced circumstances? Would they accept a nomination for deputy first ministership? Because remember, the DUP only went into power sharing really with Sinn Féin when Ian Paisley could be first minister. If the DUP can't have that prize, they might walk away. And if you don't have the largest parties from both sides in the institutions, those institutions are potentially about to topple over.
Now, sometimes it's wise to say, well, so what? So tell us, so what? If the power sharing executive were to collapse, direct rule from Westminster would have to take its place. What's wrong with that? You
can argue that there's nothing wrong with that. It would be more satisfactory, given you've had direct rule by default in recent years, because of the lack of agreement between the parties on issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has legislated directly. Westminster has passed legislation that legalised abortion and legalised same-sex marriage. Brandon Lewis, the current Secretary of State, said only this week that he would legislate to introduce Irish language provision. You also had the protocol. The Assembly doesn't really have much of a say. It has a vote in 2024 on whether to overturn the protocol, that border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but it had no say in its implementation. So you might argue you've got direct rule by default anyway. The argument against that, well, it's twofold. One is, obviously, if you're a nationalist, wanting a united Ireland, why would you want direct rule from Westminster? It's anathema to you. The second argument is the public opinion argument that if you look, successive surveys of the population of Northern Ireland do suggest very strongly that they do want devolved power sharing to carry on, albeit on their community's terms. You know, there aren't many takers for direct rule. It never exceeds more than 20% when you do these public opinion surveys in Northern Ireland. It's not a big preference. And, you know, direct rule, who would really thinks that direct rule in the 70s, 80s and 90s in Northern Ireland was highly successful? It wasn't. You had 3 decades of trouble. So, you know, for all devolved power sharing's faults, you can argue it's the least bad option.
Now, the proximate cause was the Irish Language Act issue, but that can't really be the underlying point because, as you say, this was agreed and then agreed again and agreed just earlier this year. So what's it really all about, Professor?
I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which Irish language provision does polarise the electorate. Less than 10% of unionists say that they want Irish language provision, whereas more than 90% of nationalists say they do want it. But I would agree with you, there are bigger issues. At the heart of this, relations between the DUP and Sinn Féin are toxic. They always are. Sinn Féin argue that the DUP is trying to deny basic rights, whether it be everything from same-sex marriage through to Irish language. The DUP, and some to the right of the DUP, the traditional unionist voice, which only has 1 seat in the Assembly but is to the right of the DUP, they would argue, look, Sinn Féin, ultimately, they're all about creating instability in Northern Ireland because ultimately, and it's no secret to anyone, they want a united Ireland and therefore they're quite happy to see Stormont ultimately be dysfunctional because it's about unity. I mean, both of those arguments, it depends on your political perspective as to how much you buy into them. I mean, what we do know is obviously the constitutional question was rearisen by Brexit. I don't think it ever really went away, though. And at some point, at some time unspecified, there is likely to be a border poll, a constitutional referendum as to whether Northern Ireland should reunite with the Republic, whether there should be a united Ireland. We don't know when that'll be. It's up to the Secretary of State. Only he can decide when a referendum takes place based upon the criteria, according to the Good Friday Agreement, is when he thinks that it's possible, or likely, I should say, that there will be a majority vote in favour of a united Ireland within Northern Ireland. I don't think we're there yet, although there are some signs that support for a united Ireland is on the up, is on the increase within Northern Ireland. But it's in the Secretary of State's gift, and the criteria are not crystal clear as to when he should call that referendum.
Now, in the latest opinion polls out of Dublin, Sinn Féin are now miles ahead of the other parties, and you just said that it's quite likely that if the Northern Irish Assembly elections go ahead in, 9 months from now or so, that Sinn Féin will also win those. Looked at from, the man from the moon, that would seem to indicate ineluctable progress towards reunification.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if Sinn Féin become the largest party in the south, and dominate the government down there, they probably have to work in coalition as part of that government. And if Sinn Féin is the largest party in the north, and Sinn Féin's providing the first minister in the north, then first of all, that's a big psychological and political defeat for unionism in the north. And secondly, it does increase, as you suggest, the pressure for that border poll, because Sinn Féin has demonstrated its popularity, and Sinn Féin's project, we all know what Sinn Féin's ultimate project is, it is Irish unification. Now, how long the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland can resist that pressure, I think, is open to question in that scenario. I certainly think that Sinn Féin will become the largest party in Northern Ireland. I think the beauty for nationalists is that they could afford to lose a first border poll as long as it's close, because under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, it's not like the Scottish situation where people, there's arguments as to when, if ever, a second referendum should be held. The criteria is clearer for Northern Ireland. Another referendum can be held. It doesn't have to be, but it can be held every 7 years thereafter. So potentially you could lose the first, but eventually get unification over the line. As I say, I still think there's some way to travel. You're not getting unionists waking up in the morning and thinking, you know what, I'm an Irish nationalist now. That isn't happening. But there are unionists or people who would have been unionists once upon a time, who are becoming constitutional agnostics at least. They're moving into the centre, and they would contemplate or accept a united Ireland in a way that would have been impossible only half a generation ago. That's where the change is happening. And also in terms of the demographics, they're against unionism. The nationalist population is rising. There's also been that growth in the centre ground. So the unionist parties are fishing in an ever-shrinking electoral reservoir. It's going to need a very, very strong and adept DUP leader, or a leader of unionism more broadly, to actually turn that round.
What are the Republicans, the Nationalists, Sinn Féin, what are they doing to, as it were, persuade people who are in the unionist community? They talked about this project for a new Ireland and so on. I'm not close enough to it to know if that's had any effect. But if I was running the campaign for reunification in Ireland, I think I'd be trying harder to assuage the concerns of the unionist community, who are still, at minimum, many hundreds of thousands of people who have rights and who have traditions, some of which we'll see marching on the streets this month, next month.
Absolutely. There hasn't been enough discussion as to what a united Ireland would look like. And if you're going to have a constitutional referendum, then I think the public, whether you be unionist, nationalist or neither, they're entitled to know what the structures of Irish unity would consist of. There's a difficult debate here within unionism as to what to do about this. Some unionists, including the former DUP leader Peter Robinson, have suggested that unionists should engage in constitutional conversations with nationalists to discuss what a united Ireland would look like. Robinson thinking that unionists can still win a border poll, but they should engage in those discussions. Other unionist leaders have been very reluctant. In fact, they've refused to do so because they argue, look, it's discussing the surrender terms as far as we're concerned. Why should we discuss the dissolution of our own country? So there's an ongoing debate within unionism. Nationalists do want unionists to engage in these discussions because you need to know, for example, whether there would be devolution for the North under unification, in which Stormont would remain and allow unionist expression of their British identity within a united Ireland. I don't think there's any point in pretending as well that a united Ireland would feel anything other than a defeat for unionists, because by definition, the union is severed. You can't avoid that. So I think what's been interesting as well this week is that Leo Varadkar, who's never really pushed the Irish unity agenda as leader of Fine Gael, he was talking about his desire for Irish unity this week and hopes that it's a project that will be completed in his lifetime. Micheál Martin, the current Taoiseach, he has created a shared island unit, which has sort of very gently discussed the idea of Irish unity, but hasn't really advanced discussion of it. And then, of course, the Sinn Féin, which is pushing for a border poll, and it always pushes for Irish unity. Unionists are often reluctant to engage with Sinn Féin because of Sinn Féin's past. So to some extent, it's a pan-nationalist project now to try and get Irish unification, but it's one that unionists are reluctant, many unionists are reluctant to engage with. They'd rather the whole idea would just go away.
Is not going to go away, of course. Professor, thank you very much for your peerless analysis. Thanks again for joining us. Now, here's the 740 question. In the 1970 World Cup final, Brazil and Pelé became the first team and the first player to win the World Cup 3 times. Who did they beat? A, Uruguay, B, Mexico, or C, Italy? Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a
ahead.
book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Some of us, of course, think there has been no World Cup like the 1970 World Cup. There has been no team like Brazil in 1970 and no player like Pelé. And in that final, which may have been the best ever final, Brazil, of course, beat Italy. Now, should Shamima Begum be allowed back into the UK? A, yes, 17%. B, no, 69%. C, charged on arrival, 14%. 1,369 of you have voted so far. You can vote for the next hour or so. The Telegram poll, as opposed to the Twitter poll, the aforementioned one, is quite different. It's similar, but not entirely. 27% of the Telegram poll say yes, she should be allowed back into the UK. 44% say no, she should not. That's a considerable difference. And 20% say she should be charged on arrival. If you've got a point of view on any of these things, call me. The United Kingdom, 08081 96 5522. 08081 96 5522. It's absolutely free. If you're in the United States, it's also absolutely free. +1 844 944 3344. Or you can tweet us, of course, as many of you have been doing. DF and V asks, will you continue to present if you become a member of Parliament? Well, yes, of course, Parliament doesn't sit on Sunday nights, so you're not getting rid of me that easily. And Mick Commons says, Britain needs to trail her homegrown terrorists to get to the bottom of what happened, not remove citizenship and leave them in Iraqi Kurdistan. And Joanne Nairi said, taking a knee is a sign of respect. I haven't gotten any problem with it and rather like it. And Alexandros says, I won't take the knee for anyone. And Nom de Plume says, I've got a real problem with taking the knee. I've only got one leg. And K.A. says, it seems like we're talking about stupid non-issues. Who cares about what a school renamed their head person? I do, actually. Kay, why don't you call me? I'd like to hear your argument on that. And Nina on Twitter said, there are no ifs or buts. Shamima Begum should not be allowed back in the UK. Anyone who thinks she is so innocent is incorrect. She knew what she was up to when she left, and believe me, these girls know what they are doing because that's what they got taught in their religion, which is, of course, utter nonsense. Also on Twitter, Marek said, with all these woke liberal barristers, if she's allowed back and even if she loses her case, we'd never be able to get rid of her. We'd be branded racists if we tried. And Gerard White says Shamima Begum did something very stupid, aged 15. I joined the French Foreign Legion, aged 23. That was a bit stupid, but I didn't have my citizenship stripped from me. Good point, Gerard. And Grumbleweed said, if Begum is never allowed to return, she may inadvertently act as a deterrent to make others think twice about joining ISIS. If we go soft and let her return, it might encourage others to join ISIS. It's not only about Begum. And Mandy Burrows says, can't say anything without offending snowflakes. So sick of these woke people telling us what we should be doing and saying. And David says, sadly, Mr. Galloway has become as desperate and divisive as the Tories. He has become a reactionary and right-wing. I'm out. Thanks for watching, David. And Jack Klugman says, college TV courses have better production values than grifter Britian. GB News. And Alexander Chan says, Owen Jones is indeed a big part of the problem of why Labour cannot win a single election. Now, Andrew Durry is a journalist and filmmaker of note and often goes to quite difficult places to make his films, and I take my hat off to him. He previously travelled to the front lines of the war in Somalia. He infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan, and he's been exposed to radiation at a former nuclear test site, which has been featured in the Netflix documentary Dark Tourist. He's just done a new feature-length documentary called Danger Zone, and amongst the other good things in it is an interview with the former ISIS bride, Shamima Begum. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tell us first about the film as a whole. What's your take on events in that film?
The film's... hi, actually. How are you?
Good,
the film's
nice to see you.
The film's about several things. Mainly it's about my travels to places like Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan during the war period, and looking at the effects after the war. Some during. I mean, I've come under attack in Kirkuk. I was shot at by ISIS. So it's a general picture of the effects of war.
Well, that's always, of course, worth doing and certainly worth seeing, as this one will be. How did you end up talking to Shamima Begum?
Oh, that's $1 million question now. We were filming in Raqqa, so we planned as part of this. We filmed as part of this production. We were going to look at the wrecks and ruins of Raqqa and people that are living back in Raqqa from the refugee camps to return back to their old buildings. So during that period of time, I had a day break, and I just give it a punt to see if I could go and see Shamima. We wasn't far from her. We had our applications processed at the Al Roj camp, and then Shamima agreed, or she had no choice, but agreed to have sort of 30 seconds with me. She has a choice whether to take part in an interview, and thankfully, after convincing her, she did.
And when you say you asked permission, who did you ask it of? Presumably not the government of Syria.
No, well, it's funny because all these top-line journalists have been going through our solicitors. So we have good fixers who know people within the camp. So contacted them. We sent a written application to see if we could visit the camp. Not necessarily to see Shamima. It was British-speaking detainees inside the camp, which we did. So what happens is you get British-speaking prisoners put into rooms beside the meeting room. Then you go into each room and choose which one you want to speak to. And I had option of two, Shamima and Khalifa Kelly's wife, and I spoke to both. And
what was she like, Shamima Begum?
When I first went there, I mean, I've seen all these comments on Twitter, let her rot, let her rot. And do you know what? My first opinion when I was here, I jumped on the bandwagon, let her rock. And when I first saw her, I saw this kind of timid, waif, scared person who totally refused. She said, I'm not going to talk to you. I really had enough of journalists. I said, oh, well, I'm not really a journalist. I'm a filmmaker. We're making a film. And we want to speak about you, not about you at the site of seeing heads in a bin or whether you took part in activities. It was to find about you. So she's just really timid, really scared, shaky, frightened, tearful.
And physically, I mean, is she thin? Does she appear to be eating? Is she healthy?
No, she looks really healthy, but she is extremely thin. And I asked her during the interview, why are you so thin? She sells her food. She gets food parcels and she sells them for clothes.
Well, I mean, she looked quite trendy there, not at all like the person that we saw in the ISIS heartland when they were in control. Is that deliberate to pull on the heartstrings of the people here in Britain?
Do you know what? That's exactly what I thought when I first went there. But after speaking to her, she says that she's always dressed Western. She just really dresses up for the media. So it's the other way around, it's reverse. She says she dresses Western because it makes her feel good. And anything in that camp that makes you feel good is okay by her. Little things that make her... She's struggled with wanting to commit suicide. She's down. She's not liked by any of the other people inside the camp. So these little things make her feel good. She continues and does.
And what does she live in? One of those tents that we saw?
Yeah, she does. She pointed out a tent, but she wouldn't let us in it. I don't know if it's because she's a normal 21-year-old who's a little bit untidy, but we did go in other people's tents, very tidy. They've got air conditioning in them, and they look quite comfortable.
And did she ask you to make a plea for her to be allowed back, or has she given that up?
She says, I mean, on my question to her, I said, look, not everybody hates you in the UK. So she goes, yes, they do. Everybody hates me. I'm not going to ever get my citizenship. And that's where she come back, pretty please, let me back. But it wasn't a plea. She just doesn't believe she's coming back.
But presumably she could go to Bangladesh, or have they refused to accept her?
Part of the interview, when I was walking and we were casually talking, I brought up Bangladesh and I asked her, she said there was no way that she could ever go to Bangladesh because she would be executed or killed as soon as she entered Bangladesh, because under their legal system she would be executed, she believes.
Now, just for those that haven't followed this story, and a lot of international viewers and listeners, of course, she ran away as a child, aged 15, to join the ISIS. She became a child bride to one of the ISIS terrorists, and I think he was killed. She was captured, and the British have removed her citizenship and said that she is a Bangladeshi, although she's never been a Bangladeshi. And that's because Britain doesn't want her back here, doesn't want to try her for crimes that she may or may not have been involved in, doesn't want her here because, as you see from our poll, it's enormously unpopular, the idea of her coming back here. Did you have a take on that? You said in the beginning you were of the let her rot school of thought. Have you changed your mind on that, Andrew?
I certainly have. No, her husband is still alive. He's in a jail somewhere.
Oh, he's still alive. Okay, I beg your pardon.
I questioned her on him as well, and I asked if she still loves him. She says she hates him. I believe, after spending a lot of time with her, I mean, mine was more, not intimate, more of a role. I mean, we went out and we talked, and after spending a bit of time, she didn't try and fool me. And I think that she was quite a simplistic girl. My point of view is, when she was 15, I mean, I've seen in the press today that she was wearing ISIS badges to school. Somebody's failed her. She was definitely radicalised. I asked her when she was a young girl what she was like when a young girl. She was a normal young girl, and I asked about TV show. That's where we got the friends. These questions were just to try and personalise her, to make her not just a figure. So she enjoyed Friends, she enjoyed Kanye West, she enjoyed normal things. So something stopped her and changed her thought process at some stage. I have my ideas, and I know pretty much in my mind who radicalised her, but she most definitely was. In any case, she was a minor when she went out. I think the school system failed her because they must have seen a change in this girl. They must have done. If she's walking around schools with ISIS badges, how come no one picked her up on that? That surprises me. I don't think she's manipulative. I think she's very childlike. I think she understands she's made a big mistake. She told me as soon as she got into or was in some area, she didn't say what it was, under ISIS, she wanted to leave immediately. She realised it wasn't this paradise situation. Both her and her husband tried to escape, she said, but her husband was imprisoned. I think she is guilty. She's guilty of treason to the country, I believe. We have to trial her. My opinions change for twofold. I think she's childlike and we can't leave in the camp because she was a British citizen. My second is people don't understand our Rouge will close. That camp cannot remain as it is. She will and could be just set free like other ISIS brides inside Iraq. I visited another camp there where they've all been dispersed. What happens if we lose control of her? So most people on Twitter have been sending these remarks to me saying, oh, you're an ISIS supervisor. I'm not. I'm patriotic to my country. And I believe it would be better having control of her, knowing where she is, because we have to be careful what we wish for. So anybody out there's going, oh, let her rot. Let her rot in prison, the British taxpayers' money. How do we know that with British taxpayers not already paying for her anyway out there? So I believe for her own security of her country, she should come back, face trial, because basically she's had trial by media anyway. It's all superstition, everything. Some people say that she joined the police out there. These are questions we ask. I can't see her. I think she was a baby-making cleaner of what I've spoken to her about.
What about, lastly, because we're running out of time, you said you saw another prisoner there.
God, her.
Who is that other prisoner, Kelly?
Terence Kelly, the Irish terrorist who committed suicide, blew up a truck bomb going towards Iraqi forces. Now that girl, right, is a lying, conniving, nasty piece of work. She asked me if I could come back and find out she still had a British citizenship. She showed no remorse for anything she'd done. As far as I'm concerned, although I do believe she should come back, I don't think that woman should ever be released. She's got no remorse for anything. And she would say had the same spill as Shamima. She was trying to play the innocent, but I could look through her eyes and I could see something that I didn't like. Now, she is what everybody believes Shamima is.
But you say Shamima was markedly different to her.
Yeah, Shamima was very timid. And I know everybody will say she played me, but it doesn't matter whether people think she's played me. My still feelings are she has to come back and face trial. And people say, oh, if you bring her back, everybody's got to come back. Well, let me tell you, there's more people come back that we don't know that are far more dangerous than Shamima that are already in the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are people who have come back that we don't know. And, of course, there are people who never went, who turned out to be extremely dangerous indeed. You can understand the point of view of the average British citizen, that we've already got enough fanatic extremists of all kinds in our country. Why volunteer to bring another one back?
But why, equally, do we want to burden her on Syria? Why should we have something that we've produced here, if she has been radicalised or non-radicalised, why should we burden her on Syria? What gives us the right to dump her in Syria?
OK, thanks, Andrew. When can we see the film?
You can see the film very shortly. It's in cinemas, and it's not about Shamima. One other thing, George, on Wednesday, I'm releasing another thing which you'll hopefully might call me back on. It's the youngest English ISIS terrorist in prison. And it's something I'm releasing on Wednesday. It's something I'm really passionate, and it might change people's minds about letting people rot in prison.
Yeah, we definitely do that. So the film will be in the cinemas. And available digitally online or
yeah,
what?
the American broadcasters is Stars, one such as HBO and that. So it'll be out on that, and I dare say we could find it on anywhere, probably on some pay-per-view somewhere at some stage. It's a really big film, and it's something I'm really proud of.
Okay, Andrew, well done. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. It's time for me to go for the news. What else can I say?
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The number of COVID-related deaths has passed 500,000 in Brazil, the second highest in the world. As experts say, the outbreak could worsen amid a slow vaccination effort and the start of winter. The virus continues to spread, with President Jair Bolsonaro still refusing to back measures like social distancing. The Health Institute Fiocruz says the situation is critical. Only 15% of adults are fully vaccinated. Congress is investigating the government's handling of the pandemic. Dr. Natalia Pasternak-Tashner, a microbiologist at the Question of Science Institute, said she saw little sign that the rise in victims would slow. President Bolsonaro has been heavily criticised for not implementing a coordinated national response and for his scepticism towards vaccines, lockdowns and mask-wearing requirements. In rallies in Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia and elsewhere, furious Brazilians carried banners with slogans like "Bolsonaro must go" or simply 500,000. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has accused the Scottish Government of hypocrisy after it announced a travel ban to parts of the region. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said on Friday non-essential travel from Scotland to Salford and Manchester would be banned from Monday. Burnham said the decision was announced out of the blue and was, quote, completely disproportionate. The Scottish Government said the decision had to be made quickly. Burnham responded that different arrangements could have been made if the First Minister had been in touch. A new bill to legalise assisted dying will be lodged at the Scottish Parliament. The proposals brought forward by Liberal Democrat Liam MacArthur aim to introduce the right to an assisted death for terminally ill, mentally competent adults. Previous attempts to change legislation in Scotland have failed. A cross-party steering group of MSPs have outlined their support of the bill in an open letter. The bill will be lodged at Holyrood on Monday, and it's understood a consultation on its context is expected to take place in the autumn. The UK could open up sooner rather than later thanks to the huge numbers of people being vaccinated. And the country is not expecting a third wave of infections, a vaccine expert has claimed. Brenda Wren, Professor of Vaccinology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, said that having more than 81% of the adult population with a first coronavirus jab and 59% with both doses is very encouraging. Asked whether the success of the vaccine programme means England will not need to wait until July 19th to fully open up, he said, "We'd still need to be vigilant, but vigilance and vaccination are the two words." Nominations for the post of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party leader have opened. Lagan Valley MP Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is favourite to take the top post and has made it clear that he would lead the party from Stormont as First Minister. Nominations close at noon on Tuesday. The contest follows the resignation of Edwin Poots on Thursday after just 3 weeks. Poots faced an internal party revolt after he agreed with Sinn Féin and nominated a First Minister. This came after Westminster vowed to push through Irish language legislation in October if Stormont fails to do so beforehand. DUP party officers have set a date of 26th of June to elect a new leader if there is more than one candidate. Former Speaker of the House of Commons and Tory MP John Bercow says he changed his allegiances to join the Labour Party. He says the Conservatives under Boris Johnson were reactionary, populist, nationalistic and sometimes even xenophobic. The government, he said, needs to be replaced. Bercow stood down as Speaker and MP in November 2019 after a decade in the job. He'd been a Tory MP for 12 years before taking the role. A member of Uganda's Olympic squad has become the first to test positive for COVID-19 on arrival in Japan for the competition, due to start on July 23rd. The event was postponed last year but is now going ahead despite a fresh wave of COVID-19 cases in Japan. Uganda is also experiencing a surge in cases which forced the government to tighten lockdown measures on Friday. The unnamed Ugandan was part of a 9-member squad that had been fully vaccinated, reports said. 3 children have been wounded after a shooting at a 1-year-old's outdoor birthday party in Toronto. The 1-year-old boy, a girl aged 5 and an 11-year-old boy were hurt when gunfire broke in the city's Rexdale neighbourhood on Saturday. A 23-year-old man was also shot in the legs, police said. Israel's new right-wing Prime Minister has said the international community should, quote, wake up to the election of Iran's next president, Ibrahim Raisi. Prime Minister Neftali Bennett said Iran's regime of brutal hangmen wants nuclear weapons, something Iran has repeatedly denied. Ibrahim Raisi was declared the winner of Iran's presidential election on Saturday. He is Iran's top judge and is said to hold ultra-conservative views. In a statement following his victory, he promised to strengthen public trust in the government and be a leader for the entire nation. And finally, it's Father's Day, and thousands of funny fathers have been battling it out in a competition that certainly was a laughing matter, or not, depending on what you find exactly funny. More than 2,700 gag-loving dads submitted their very best or worst jokes in celebration of Father's Day. Hashtag Best Dad Jokes was trending on Twitter as fathers battled it out to win the Aldi Mamia Best Dad Joke competition. Stand-up comedian Mark Watson was enlisted to judge the competition and picked father of 2, Austin May from Bedworth, Warwickshire, as the overall winner. Stand-up comedian Mark Watson was enlisted to judge the competition and picked father of 2, Austin May from Bedworth, Warwickshire, as the overall winner. Now his joke, which I'm sure you want to hear, is, I once had a limo, but when it arrived, the guy driving it walked off. I said, excuse me, are you not going to drive me? The guy told me that the price didn't include a driver, so I'd spent £400 on a limo and I've nothing to show for it. Get it? Chauffeur. It. I guess it's all in the delivery, and I'm sure Austin delivered it better than that. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, it's evident, has been ever since the supporters came back into the stadium, that there is not an unalloyed patience for the practice of taking the knee before the beginning of every football match. It was embarrassing at the beginning when some fans began to boo it, but now they're having to take extraordinary measures to try and drown out the booing, including cheering from those who support the practice. So it's turning out to be divisive amongst football fans in the stadium, certainly divisive in the community as a whole. The practice started, honestly enough. It was a decent, honest response, a spontaneous one, to the brutal murder of a black man by a white police officer in Minneapolis. We watched it in real time, almost. We saw it happening on video. That police officer has been convicted of murder, and the practice of kneeling in solidarity, not with George Floyd, the victim of that murder alone, but the perception that law enforcement in the United States and in Britain were disproportionately violent towards people of colour in their custody and took a different approach to policing communities of colour than they did to policing other communities, had widespread support, had demonstrations in its support, had politicians like Keir Starmer very ostentatiously taking the knee. It spread far beyond football. But football now is its last redoubt. I said, I think a month ago or more now, I think while it may have been a good turn, it's gone on too long. And it would be better to end it in good order rather than in disarray. It would be better to find another way for footballers to show their disapproval of racism, which is a real thing in the game as well as in the society as a whole. Now, my next guest, Zuby, he's a friend of the show. He's been on before. He's also appeared on some lesser programs on the BBC, on ITV, on Sky, on Fox, on many of the big shows in the United States, the Joe Rogan Experience, the Adam Carolla Show, the Glenn Beck podcast. He's a very interesting man, born in England, brought up in Saudi Arabia. He is a rapper, but he's a clean rapper. He knows about sport. He is a sportsman, although he once briefly identified as a woman so that he could win the women's weightlifting championship, just to prove how absurd such an idea was. I'm glad to say we can welcome him back. Now, Zuby, thanks very much for joining us. I hope my introduction did your career justice. What's your take on taking the knee?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, George. I mean, this is something that actually originated specifically with Colin Kaepernick, the American football player, several years ago now, as a protest to what he felt was racial injustice within the policing and justice system in the USA. So first of all, it's really fascinating just how far and how long this thing has gone on for. As you mentioned, it was sort of revitalized last summer with the George Floyd situation. My position on it from the very beginning has always been I support people's right to do it, but the act itself I've never thought is particularly helpful nor useful, in my own opinion. As I said, this is something that's gone on for many years. In terms of tangible results, I don't think much has happened. I think more people might be talking, and there might be even more polarization and more division, so on and so forth. I don't really think these sort of gestures are particularly helpful. I'm a huge free speech advocate, so I'm not here saying people should not be allowed to do it if they want to, but I don't really think it's helpful, and I don't think it's very targeted either. I think if you're going to do some sort of protest, then it should be targeted. It should be very clear on what is being protested and what exactly is being done, what the request is, what the demand is, what people want to actually happen. Because otherwise the message can get confused, it can get muddied up, and also a lot of people are not going to even understand what it's about. So if people do start booing when people are kneeling, for example, there could be all sorts of reasons why people are booing, just like there could actually be quite a lot of different reasons why people are kneeling. And so in my own opinion and my observation, I don't think it's particularly helpful. I do think it's probably well-intentioned by most people, but I think that there are better ways to tackle any form of injustice or bigotry in society.
Well, it has become rote, and people have continued to do it because they were already doing it and didn't really quite know a way out of doing it. Some will have done it insincerely, but most, I think, will have done it quite sincerely. Certainly the black footballers who know what it's like to grow up black in a society where they are a minority, where they are coming, people like Raheem Sterling, for example, from very mean streets, from very poor backgrounds. I have no doubt that they did not grow up having a pleasant experience at the hands of authority, including police authority. But it was incoherent in a sense from the beginning also, because people did it before they knew what kind of a person George Floyd was. That's not to say, of course, that his vicious murder was not reprehensible in the extreme, but that he was a figure not really worthy of being painted on walls as a mural and held up as an icon was not known at the time that this all began. And secondly, it was not known that, and here I mean in capital letters, BLM would later go so wrong, where its leaders end up buying large mansions with the money of the movement, where its political agenda is, well, not quite what people thought they were kneeling for in the beginning. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, well, I think the whole movement is what became new to a lot of people last year. BLM, I think, began in, I want to say, 2015 or 2016. And so a lot of what has been revealed about them over the last few months that sort of hit the mainstream, a lot of that was known by people many years ago. I mean, I've been very familiar with BLM for at least five years now, and I'm not a supporter of it, and I don't advocate the organization, because I know that what they stand for is far beyond the simple slogan, which is also their name. It's a great example of semantic overload. So, of course, every decent person agrees with the literal meaning of the statement, but then you have a whole organization, an actual entity, and then you've also got a movement which is attached to it. So really, when people even talk about BLM or Black Lives Matter, there's really three things there which are all getting conflated. And so someone can absolutely support the statement, Black Lives Matter. Yes, of course. That's self-evident to any decent person in the world, just like everybody's life matters. But in terms of the organization and its goals and its motives and its leadership, so on and so forth, what they're doing with all the money that's been donated to them and have been doing for many years, that's a whole nother situation. So somebody could support the statement BLM, and most people do, but there are tons of people who don't support the organization, including a lot of Black people. And, you know, that has nothing to do with the statement itself. It's like if someone had an organization called Don't Kick Puppies, but they actually had some sort of radical, extreme agenda, which also happened to include not kicking puppies, then it would be disingenuous for someone to say, oh, well, you know, I agree with the statement. If someone said, I agree with the statement, but not the movement, then that would be very clear cut. But I think they chose the name very specifically. But I think what's going on now with the whole kneeling situation, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think this goes way beyond, I mean, George Floyd doesn't have anything to do with what's happening, say, in football. I mean, we're not even talking about the same region of the world here. There's no reason, it doesn't make sense for what happened in Minneapolis to happen, and then next thing you know, across Europe, people are kneeling against police brutality, so on and so forth. So again, I think if people are going to protest something and actually try to fix something, then it needs to be clear cut and specific what it is that they are trying to fix. Otherwise, it's going to go on forever. I mean, at what point will people stop kneeling? What do they want to happen? What's the request? What's the demand? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they're sure. And I certainly don't think the majority of the people watching the game are sure either.
What's the take of Black people in this country and in America in general? I know you can't speak for Black people and wouldn't want to, but you of course, move in circles that must have discussed this matter. Is what you're saying in any way controversial amongst Black people, do you think?
I don't particularly think so, no. There's a really wide range. There's a very diverse range of views and opinions from what I gather, even amongst myself and my friends, certain family members, etc. You know, people have different levels of both knowledge of this particular organization and movement and, you know, different ideas about how significant or severe racism is in 2021 in the UK, in the USA, etc. So there's a huge range of opinions on this subject, and I can certainly speak for myself, and I can talk about my own experiences, but I can talk about data, and I can talk about statistics, but everyone's going to have different views on it, different feelings, different opinions, so I can only ever speak for myself.
So, just finally, Zuby, what are you up to now? What are you working on? How can people follow you, stay in touch?
Sure thing. So I've got a new album, which is now available to pre-order from my website, teamzuby.com. The album is called Word of Zuby. It's going to be out wider in the next few months, but if someone wants to pre-order it right now, you can get it from my website. I've also got my book out right now, Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody, which is also available on my site, teamzuby.com. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all at Zuby Music, Z-U-B-Y Music.
And you're permanently male now after your brief sojourn as a world champion female weightlifter.
We'll see. The time might come where I need to make another point, so we'll see.
Never say never. Zuby, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, the world's oldest parliament was set up in 930. Was it in A, Britain, B, China, C, Iceland? Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
All talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, it turns out that the mother of all parliaments is not, after all, in Britain, but in Iceland. It's called the Althing, A-L-T-H-I-N-G, and it was established in 930, which is not yesterday. Let me read some of the huge volume of social media. Saber says football should stick to its own anti-racism campaigns instead of associating with radical groups like BLM who are pro-violence. I doubt if they're pro-violence, Saber. Alexandros says, usually the woke brigade dislike anyone that does not follow Western ideology or accept the USA as their master. Funny that. And Elena Stone says there must be marketing companies whose jobs are to think how many issues they can promote to divide and divert people's attention to the many problems we're facing at present. And nom de plume is back. There is no black, there is no white, there isn't on the left, but there is on the right. Well, it rhymes, but I don't know what it means. UK politics. The Lion says the UK government has failed us. We were misled by false leaders, and there are far too many sheep on the street. And Colin Cornish, a Labour Party which supports a capitalist bankers EU that has overseen the demise of the traditional Labour vote, with the EU destroying Labour's political levy funding, by the EU for freedom enforcing the stripping of Britain's unionised industrial base with its cheap labour free movement scam. Thanks, that keeps the likes of Branson rich. And he blames Tony Blair for much of it. Dan Fergus says, let's remind ourselves that it's the Europhiliac leadership in the UK that brought all the negative development. And Dale says, politically correct ultra-liberals who are amazingly apologists for one of the most horrific death cults in recent history. It amazes me how many ultra-woke, feminist, liberal-minded people are so keen to see this woman return to the UK. And Richard Tyler says, no country has the right to call itself a democracy unless 50% of the media is capitalist and 50% is socialist, informing the people properly to let them make up their own mind. Is there any such society? He says, I don't think so. And Christopher Sanchez says, I would not allow Shamima Begum back if I was you. She can no longer be trusted. Even if she was young at the time, no one knows how radicalized she could be by now. I wouldn't even worry about her. But I thought that the filmmaker made a powerful point that this prison isn't going to last forever. The danger is that these ISIS prisoners, including very seriously dangerous people who've actually murdered and chopped people's heads off, end up running loose and trying to get back into this country and other countries illegally in order to carry out further terrorist acts. I thought that might have been actually the strongest point that he made. Should Shamima Begum be allowed back into the UK? Yes, 18%. No, 69%. C, charged on arrival, 13%. So, the lines are open. We're taking your calls till 9 o'clock. Malcolm in Edinburgh is up first. Malcolm, welcome.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome, sir. Go ahead.
Just like to say your set's looking fantastic, and GB News need to take a leaf out of your book and your audio. You're doing great.
They should have hired us. They should have hired us, Malcolm.
They should have done for consulting. My point, George, very quickly, is about taking the knee and Black Lives Matter. I think everyone's in unison about Black Lives Matter with that statement, absolutely 100%. And football fans have been supporting anti-racism causes for a long, long time. How the FA can turn around and criticise them. You see, when they started taking the knee and the stadiums were empty, there was no booing to be had. So when the pushback started is when the fans got back into the stadiums. Now, the Black Lives Matter organisation was synonymous with that gesture. That's an organisation that fans have seen defacing Churchill statues. They've seen rioting in the streets and our police officers taking the knee to them. It's now been established that the founders of the organisation, they're fraudsters and they're involved in shootouts in London and gang warfare. The fans do not like that organisation. They're not being racist by booing. And for them all of a sudden to turn around and saying it's got nothing to do with the organisation, it's all to do with Black Lives Matter. Everyone agrees Black Lives Matter. 90% of football fans do not like the organisation BLM. And that is just disgraceful for politicians and for the FA to turn around and criticise for the money-paying fans to make their voice heard. What about our voice? Let alone the millionaire footballers.
Well, the Labour deputy leader, Angela Rayner, explicitly said that those who feel like you are racists.
Well, she's out of touch, and she's part of the Labour movement that is out of touch. Labour, how many votes? And I'm so pleased that you are actually going to get them de-seated in their next by-election. Labour is so out of touch. For her to say that, if she would sit down in a football pub and speak to 10 football fans, you'd find 10 non-racists, and you'd find 90% that don't like the organisation Black Lives Matter. We don't like Churchill being defaced. We don't like our police taking the knee to this organisation. They should have rebranded it and said, stand up against racism, and you'd have had the fans cheering to a man.
Well, I hope so. Not entirely to a man, Malcolm, and there will be some people who claim it's because they don't like the organisation, who, you know, a few seasons ago, might have been throwing bananas at black footballers. There is racism in society, and there is racism amongst football crowds. We've seen it. We've seen anti-Semitism amongst Chelsea supporters. We've seen anti-black racism at some clubs. They've been punished for it. Their clubs have been horrified by it and so on. So I generally agree with you, but we mustn't paint Britain as a society where racism doesn't exist. It's not as bad as some other countries. If you think Britain's racist, you've never lived in France. But racism is a thing.
Oh, I would agree with you, George. But then I would ask you, compared to the 80s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 1000s, do you think it's got better? I think it's got a lot better.
I think it's a lot better, yeah. No, I absolutely do think it's a lot better. But it hasn't gone away.
No, it's not gone away, but it has got better. And I think the UK
it's quite bizarre, Malcolm. I mean, we're Scottish. There are not as many, not nearly as many black players in football in Scotland. But you can sometimes evidence racism by fans of teams, more than half of whose own players are black. How do you account for that?
Sorry, say that again, George.
Yeah, I mean, many of the top English teams, more than half of their players are themselves black, and yet supporters of those teams can often be found, perhaps often's not the right word, sometimes be found, being racist towards black people in the other team.
I think that's a very small minority, though, George. I think it's been overstated. If you look at the makeup of the fans and you look at the mixing around, there's all nationalities and all colours. If you support a team, you support a team. And we've been in this. I've been in the football stadiums when you get a few people booing the black fans. They get very quickly told to shut up and wind their necks in.
No, I agree with that. The vast majority of people in Britain, including football fans, have that zero tolerance attitude towards the minority of racists that exist. Kick It Out was quite a successful FA, homegrown, organic attempt to fight racism in football. It seems to me we could do more on that. We don't need to import a rather contentious organization from the United States.
Spot on, George, spot on.
Thank you, Malcolm, and very nice to hear from you. Mike is in the Bahamas. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, how are you?
All good, thanks, by the grace of God. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm obviously American, I'm also British, but I'm calling up as an American. I don't see the problem with taking the knee. America is all about free speech, and that's not even disrespectful. If the players left the field during the playing of the national anthem, or didn't show up till after the national anthem, I think that would be disrespectful. So I think they're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Is that what Colin did? He never worked again in football, did he? After he took the knee.
No, he got
Was that during the
blacklisted.
national anthem?
He took the knee during the national anthem, yes.
And you would characterize that as disrespectful?
I would not. It's not disrespectful. Taking the knee is still showing respect. I would say if he left the field during the national anthem or made sure he didn't get on the field till after, that would be disrespectful. But I don't see the problem.
That seems to me a fair point.
Of
There's a
him
lot of
doing
people who purport on other issues to be wholly in favour of free speech, but I'm not so keen if a footballer freely speaks or acts in a way that they don't like.
Well, I think then, because there's the commercial aspect to it, the sponsors are probably worried, and that might be behind it.
Okay, many thanks, Mike in the Bahamas. Kevin is in Virginia. Let's hear from him. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. I tell you what, my family has been enjoying listening to you for, I want to say, over a decade.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking my call. Now, I know I've been listening to your show off and on for the past hour or two or so, and I know that my topic is not one of the most hottest today, but it was regarding to the Germany taking down the Hamas flag because they attributed Hamas to incidents that happened in Germany, even though there was, from all the articles I've read, even from the Jerusalem Post, there was no direct correlation, no direct order, or no one saying, oh, we're Hamas and we're doing this in Germany.
I don't actually know that story, so educate me. What happened?
Okay, so let's see. If I can, I'll try to find the. From what I understand, last week there was some protest because Hamas was doing a whole bunch of dying in Jerusalem, and they were firing rockets. And it's on both sides. There's unhappiness on both sides, but Palestinians were doing more dying. And in Germany, there were protests, and during the protests, there were vulgarities and, I believe, violence. And so they attributed that violence to Hamas, and so the German government took down Hamas flag.
As I understand it, I'm slightly behind the times, but as I understand it, the military wing of Hamas is proscribed in the European Union, but the political party is not, though that might not be entirely accurate. That's what it was when I left Parliament some 6 years ago. I personally think that I'm not a supporter of Hamas. I never have been. I wouldn't vote for them. I was with the mainstream Arafat tendency. But banning political organizations, the political side of those organizations, is a bad idea. It's far better to have people out in the open where you can see what they're doing, to whom you can talk if talk becomes necessary. And of course, in Gaza, Hamas is the elected political leadership there. So if you don't talk to Hamas, you won't be talking to anybody in Gaza. So I would have thought the German government was making a mistake, but I don't know the facts of the incident that you described. What's your own view on it?
My own view is kind of interesting. I do understand that Hamas is the elected government. That's you can't beat that. Once people elect the government, you have to accept that. Also, it's been over 10 years since Hamas spokesperson sat down in the States, the NPR, and said we are for a two-state solution. 10 years ago, they said that. And still there's violence, and people are dying on both sides. The rockets on both sides.
Well, most of the people dying are on the Palestinian side, of course. 10, 20 times as many. And 10, 20 times as many maimed and wounded. And 10 times as much property destroyed. And the people in Gaza have no electricity. They have no medicine. They are short of food. They have no clean water. So this is not a fair fight, Kevin.
You are correct. I can't deny that. You are correct.
The point is, I think, that the events in Jerusalem were not caused by Hamas. They were caused by illegal Israeli settlers bursting into one of the holiest places to Muslims in the high point of Ramadan, the exceptionally pious and holy period in which Muslims are fasting and then praying. They burst into that mosque. It's called the Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. It's extremely holy and important to Muslims, and they desecrated it. They tried to destroy it. And then Hamas fired rockets in opposition to what was happening in Jerusalem, and then Israel completely flattened Gaza for the umpteenth time. So it's wrong to equate the violence of the occupied with the violence of the occupier. After all, Kevin, it would never have happened to you, but if Hitler had crossed the channel here and managed to occupy us, I can assure you we would have been sending more than incendiary balloons at him and his occupation force. Any people is morally and legally entitled to resist military occupation of their country. Now, I think all this has gone on long enough, don't you? That it's about time the world got involved in making sure that this violence comes to an end. After all, I'll leave you with this, Kevin. If the Al-Aqsa Mosque was destroyed, God forbid, by these armed settlers, I promise you we would have an uncontrollable security situation all over the world. It's about time the world woke up to that. Last word to you, Kev.
Mr. Galloway, I tell you what, I can't add one iota to what you have said. I just want to thank you for taking my call, and I enjoy your show, and I look forward to watching you more often.
Thank you so much, sir, and regards to your good wife and family. Let's talk to Ted in Bradwell in Essex on the Shamima Begum story. Ted, welcome.
Hello, George. Wonderful to speak with you again.
Thank you.
Just in passing, I will say I know you don't use your show as a platform for your political campaigning, but I did happen to see some lovely pictures coming from that other side of the country over there.
It has been a wonderful campaign, yeah.
Yeah, and there were some great pictures. I will say some of your campaign videos have been a little bit shaky, but there's some wonderful, great to see you marching around some of those council estates.
Not many people have ever done that in the last decades, Ted.
No, I thought you were walking down that road like the Magnificent Seven, but in a more peaceful aspect.
Thank you so much. Very kind.
Now, if I had the chance to speak to your correspondent earlier, your guest,
the filmmaker, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew Durry.
Yeah.
Now, I think he was on a different wavelength, but I think the glaring question to me is, can the authorities afford to allow Shamima Begum to come into this country and go into a court of law and tell her story? The reason I say that is, if we have memories of the war in Syria and that whole area, I mean, what used to call Mesopotamia, ISIS, and before that Al Qaeda, we saw these people who, and a lot of them were recruited from rundown council estates and places in Hackney where I used to live. I used to see lads that were just local troublemakers, or well, not so much troublemakers, like fringe activity for low-level criminals, suddenly becoming Muslim converts, and then you wouldn't see them again. And what we understand is that they were looking for people who got perhaps a violent background, or wanted to take out their anger against the world and society, authority, to harness that and recruit them as well. I think both you and I are probably fans of the International Brigade, and in Spain. And from my point of view, it seems like young people who were hoodwinked into thinking they were joining some kind of international Arab Legion of freedom fighters that were going to go out there and do some good in the world, or to put things right. And I think they were hoodwinked. Now, one of your fellow correspondents or journalists on RT, Martin Summers, I don't know if you've ever met him.
I haven't, no.
No, well, he's very, very good on this subject. And I've heard him speak several times about a gentleman in Belgium, I think it was, who was a recruiter for ISIS. And he's the gentleman that recruited Shamima Begum into this network and got her travel expenses paid. A lot of these people come from a very poor background. Where do they suddenly get their travel expenses from? Where do ISIS get their weapons from? Where did they get all those shiny pickup trucks from that they were trooping backwards and forwards across the desert, raising clouds of dust in those wonderful shiny Japanese pickup trucks? There's big money involved. More people made the money available. And if you speak to Martin Summers, journalist, often pops up on RT, he would tell you that it was Canadian intelligence that paid Shamima's traveling expenses out to Syria.
Well, that's a big claim. I can't back it, of course. I have no idea if that's true or not. If you say that an RT correspondent has claimed that, that's very interesting. Why so? Why Canada?
Well, I think if we think about you must be aware that spying that is done on us by U.S. intelligence and GCHQ spies on that's how they get around the law, isn't it? It's not legal, I don't think, for GCHQ to spy or for the U.S. to enact this surveillance on their own citizens. So they use GHCQ does the work in the United States. That's the way I understand the way the system works. And
I'm not sure about that. But what I will say is there are major question marks as to what ISIS really was, who ISIS really were, how they managed to take over a territory the size of Britain in the western part of Iraq and the northern part, and almost reaching Damascus in Syria, where they got the funds, the weapons, the vehicles, and so on. These questions are there. They have never yet been satisfactorily answered, but they will have to be one day. I believe there were state actors involved supporting the development of this murder death cult called ISIS. And I think when we learn the answers, we're going to be shocked, but perhaps not surprised. I cannot say that I have ever suspected Canada before, though I do believe there were state actors involved. Last word to you, Ted.
Oh, okay. And if I could very, very briefly make a reference to there's something on the taking the knee, which nobody has brought up yet. But very briefly, if you remember, Prime Minister Cameron he was defeated when he voted for strikes on Syria. People thought it was a great victory. They wanted up front to go to war in Syria.
I was one of them. I spoke in that debate. I commend my speech to the House. Go ahead. Last word.
And you know these people who they don't give up that easily, and they found other ways of doing it. Now, on the taking a knee, somebody posted up a wonderful picture going back to the 60s of Martin Luther King and his followers in nice, lovely collar and tie and overcoats, trilby hats, taking the knee, kneeling down on one knee in the nicely pressed trousers, having a prayer before they went on one of the civil rights marches.
I know the picture very well. They were blocked by the police from crossing a bridge. I think it was in Atlanta, but I may be wrong. And it's a very iconic photograph. So you're right, it goes back as long ago as the 1960s.
Took the knee originally, and on that instance when it first happened, and they were playing the national anthem, the gesture was one of, rather than standing up, puffing out the chest, hand on chest in pride, was to kneel down in humility and submission. And that, I think that was the meaning of the gesture.
Yeah, well, I knew before God myself, and the Reverend Martin Luther King was a very God-fearing man. Ted, thank you very much for that exceptional call. In 1967, the first global satellite program was broadcast featuring the Beatles. What did they sing? A, Across the Universe. B, Hey Jude. C, All You Need Is Love. In 1967, the first global satellite program was broadcast featuring the Beatles. What did they sing? Across the Universe, Hey Jude, or All You Need Is Love. I've got a few points to make on that, but after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
And the answer is C. All you need is love. Now, in 1999, I took a red London bus, a 1963 Routemaster, which broke down more times than I could count, all the way from Big Ben to Baghdad. Amongst its many attributes were powerful speakers on the bus that played music as we went through Europe and then North Africa and then the Middle East all the way to Baghdad. It played in particular 2 songs. One was Give Peace a Chance, and the other was All You Need Is Love. And I'll tell you why that's in my mind. I recently rewatched a magnificent film of that epic journey called Big Ben to Baghdad. Julie Christie, the Oscar-winning actress, provided the narration with a perfectly lovely voice and tone. It's available free on YouTube. You really should watch it and see what I looked like when I was older. Now, where am I going next? Am I taking more calls? Yes. Ian in Hounslow is next up. Go ahead, Ian.
Good evening, George.
Evening.
Nice to talk to you again. I just wondered what you thought about the hit piece put out on Facebook by Naz Shah. That I watched.
I don't really like to use the show and the platform to discuss my own elections and party and so on. So I really wouldn't go there, Ian. Have you got anything else you want to talk about?
Well, yes, actually. I've just finished watching a film called The Day the Earth Stood Still. I don't know if you know it.
I don't actually. Tell me about it.
Well, it's basically a social commentary on how the human race is determined to destroy itself through warlike bigotry, and we need to learn how to get on together, otherwise we're finished.
And where can we see this?
I've just seen it on TV, but it was remade with Keanu Reeves. But the original one was in the 1950s, starring Michael Rennie, and the American government tried to suppress it because of its message of universal peace. It was quite subversive at the time.
It's very interesting. Elysium, did you see Elysium? I quite like these science fiction, but based in what is perfectly logical fact. Elysium, it deals with what might happen in the future when the richest people and the most powerful people actually live above the earth in Elysian fields with the oxygen controlled, still using the resources and the labor of the poor masses still living back down on the earth, but the elite, instead of living in gated communities, are actually living in huge satellite mini planets just above the Earth's surface. Very, very interesting. Ian, thanks for that. Right. Sorry I couldn't take on your first point. It's not that I couldn't, it's just that I don't think it would be right. Eugene is in Manchester. Let's hear from him. Eugene, welcome.
Hi, George. How are you today?
Very good, thank you very much.
Yeah, I just heard you talking about Elysium, and I think that's kind of what's happening, like with all the fears and the warmongering of World War III, and all these rich people now starting to have the technology to be able to escape.
Yeah, to absent themselves from the problems that they cause. You know, cut the police budget and have your own private security force. Cut the street lighting, but have your own gated community bathed in searchlights. Shut the local baths and have your own gated community have its own heated pool. all to save tax money that you might otherwise have been asked to pay. You feel me?
Yes. Hypocrites, very, very big hypocrites, these people. Now, also, I want to talk about G7 and exactly what this alliance. It's kind of a group of former imperialists who, like, invaded other countries, pretty much.
Well,
and,
between them, there was virtually no country in the world that they had not invaded.
Exactly.
Including, of course, the two big, powerful economies that they excluded from their ranks. China and Russia were both invaded and occupied by the people that were excluding them because they say Crimea had been occupied. You couldn't make it up.
Yet, all the countries, basically, if you do not bend your knee to Washington, they organize a regime change or overthrow your government directly or indirectly, any way they can. You have to bend the knee to the powers that be. I remember in the G7, Biden said, what will countries think of us if they thought that America was interfering in internal elections?
I saw that, yeah. It would have been funny coming from anyone, but coming from him, who's been 50 years in the Senate, supporting the invasion of everyone.
Every country, more than 80 countries have been invaded or interfered with elections, directly or in a direct way. And I'm actually for a revolution. These people are talking about owning nothing and being happy. No, I cannot stand for this. We cannot allow this to happen.
Well, Eugene, as the great Scottish poet Robert Burns said, the greatest gift that God would give us is to see ourselves as others see us. Thank you very much for that call. Joseph is in Quebec. Let's go there. Joseph, welcome.
Welcome, George. How are you? I'm a big follower of you for, since I remember.
Knee high to a grasshopper. Joseph, thanks. Thanks for that. Go on.
You're welcome. Okay, so my main concern right now is the Islamophobia going around the world.
Seems to be a real problem in Canada, to many people's surprise. The murder of a whole family almost by a terrorist driving a car at them was so horrific, and yet hardly made any big news around the world. But it did. It did. As someone who it happened in London, Ontario, and as someone who's spoken in London, Ontario, more than once, it really hurt me, that story. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the problem here is what is Islamophobia? Who is creating it? Who is funding it? It's not a natural phenomenon that people to be afraid of someone. The financing, the money, the advertising people get when they spread it. It's not only in Canada or U.S. They're doing this in India. They're doing this in Myanmar. If you notice, wherever there is a genocide of Muslims, there is always a connection with Israel. If you look at a show, it was an investigative show. It's called Islamophobia Inc. Right? Mm-hmm. On that one, it shows every country is getting their funding, their money, their know-how, their technology to spread Islamophobia all over the world. And this is the motive of the Israeli Zionist Jews.
I really don't think that is true. Israel's not in the habit of giving money to anybody. Israel as a state is a taker of money from other countries in the world. Islamophobia is, of course, hatred of Muslims, just like anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews. Both of these things exist. They are phenomena that have some basis in history long ago, mainly the anti-Semitism, which has existed for 1,000 years. I got on the train at York today, there was a pogrom, a massacre of Jews in New York, hundreds, centuries ago. Islamophobia in Britain is relatively new, at least it has been given a name relatively recently, but it's common or garden racism mainly, isn't it, Joseph? Sikhs get attacked because people think that they are Muslims. Now, Israeli politics, of course, is very deeply seeded with people who hate and fear Muslims, mainly because Israel has taken a country that was predominantly Muslim, and the people of that country want their country back. So there's, if you like, a logical reason why Israel would have a politics which was Islamophobic. But I really don't think Israel is responsible for Islamophobia in Canada. I really don't think that. Last word to you, Joseph.
George, that is something I have done extensive research on. And I also want you, if you haven't seen one of the documentaries or investigative, it's called Islamophobia Inc. Have you seen that?
I haven't, no, but I will look it up.
Yeah, Islamophobia. What they do is, like even our radio stations, TV stations, all our CRT is all controlled by the Zionists. Even American,
well,
Canadian
you say
media
the Zionists. I hope you don't mean the Jews, because first of all, that would be actually factually completely wrong. None of the television stations in Britain are controlled or owned by Jews. If you mean supporters of Israel, if that's what you mean by Zionists, then of course that is absolutely true, Joseph.
That's right. That's the Zionists, whether they be Christian, whether they be Jews, or whether they
actually
be
most of them in the United States are Christians. Joseph, thanks very much for the call. Sorry to cut you short, but I need to go eventually to the news with Jamie Lowe. I want to just give you the poll numbers, which are truly amazing. Should Shamima Begum be allowed back to the UK? Yes, 17%. No, 70%. Charged on arrival, 13%. 3,249 people voted, and the poll is now closed. And now it's Jamie Lowe with the news.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The number of COVID-related deaths has passed 500,000 in Brazil, the second highest in the world. As experts say, the outbreak could worsen amid a slow vaccination effort and the start of winter. The virus continues to spread, with President Jair Bolsonaro still refusing to back measures like social distancing. The Health Institute Fiocruz says the situation is critical. Only 15% of adults are fully vaccinated. Congress is investigating the government's handling of the pandemic. Dr. Natalia Pasternak-Tashner, a microbiologist at the Question of Science Institute, said she saw little sign that the rise in victims would slow. President Bolsonaro has been heavily criticised for not implementing a coordinated national response and for his scepticism towards vaccines, lockdowns and mask-wearing requirements. In rallies in Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia and elsewhere, furious Brazilians carried banners with slogans like "Bolsonaro must go" or simply 500,000. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has accused the Scottish Government of hypocrisy after it announced a travel ban to parts of the region. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said on Friday non-essential travel from Scotland to Salford and Manchester would be banned from Monday. Burnham said the decision was announced out of the blue and was, quote, completely disproportionate. The Scottish Government said the decision had to be made quickly. Burnham responded that different arrangements could have been made if the First Minister had been in touch. A new bill to legalise assisted dying will be lodged at the Scottish Parliament. The proposals brought forward by Liberal Democrat Liam MacArthur aim to introduce the right to an assisted death for terminally ill, mentally competent adults. Previous attempts to change legislation in Scotland have failed. A cross-party steering group of MSPs have outlined their support of the bill in an open letter. The bill will be lodged at Holyrood on Monday, and it's understood a consultation on its context is expected to take place in the autumn. The UK could open up sooner rather than later thanks to the huge numbers of people being vaccinated. And the country is not expecting a third wave of infections, a vaccine expert has claimed. Brenda Wren, Professor of Vaccinology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, said that having more than 81% of the adult population with a first coronavirus jab and 59% with both doses is very encouraging. Asked whether the success of the vaccine programme means England will not need to wait until July 19th to fully open up, he said, "We'd still need to be vigilant, but vigilance and vaccination are the two words." Nominations for the post of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party leader have opened. Lagan Valley MP Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is favourite to take the top post and has made it clear that he would lead the party from Stormont as First Minister. Nominations close at noon on Tuesday. The contest follows the resignation of Edwin Poots on Thursday after just 3 weeks. Poots faced an internal party revolt after he agreed with Sinn Féin and nominated a First Minister. This came after Westminster vowed to push through Irish language legislation in October if Stormont fails to do so beforehand. DUP party officers have set a date of 26th of June to elect a new leader if there is more than one candidate. Former Speaker of the House of Commons and Tory MP John Bercow says he changed his allegiances to join the Labour Party. He says the Conservatives under Boris Johnson were reactionary, populist, nationalistic and sometimes even xenophobic. The government, he said, needs to be replaced. Bercow stood down as Speaker and MP in November 2019 after a decade in the job. He'd been a Tory MP for 12 years before taking the role. A member of Uganda's Olympic squad has become the first to test positive for COVID-19 on arrival in Japan for the competition, due to start on July 23rd. The event was postponed last year but is now going ahead despite a fresh wave of COVID-19 cases in Japan. Uganda is also experiencing a surge in cases which forced the government to tighten lockdown measures on Friday. The unnamed Ugandan was part of a 9-member squad that had been fully vaccinated, reports said. 3 children have been wounded after a shooting at a 1-year-old outdoor birthday party in Toronto. The 1-year-old boy, a girl aged 5 and an 11-year-old boy were hurt when gunfire broke in the city's Rexdale neighbourhood on Saturday. A 23-year-old man was also shot in the legs, police said. Israel's new right-wing Prime Minister has said the international community should, quote, wake up to the election of Iran's next president, Ibrahim Raisi. Prime Minister Neftali Bennett said Iran's regime of brutal hangmen wants nuclear weapons, something Iran has repeatedly denied. Ibrahim Raisi was declared the winner of Iran's presidential election on Saturday. He is Iran's top judge and is said to hold ultra-conservative views. In a statement following his victory, he promised to strengthen public trust in the government and be a leader for the entire nation. And finally, it's Father's Day, and thousands of funny fathers have been battling it out in a competition that certainly was a laughing matter, or not, depending on what you find exactly funny. More than 2,700 gag-loving dads submitted their very best or worst jokes in celebration of Father's Day. Hashtag Best Dad Jokes was trending on Twitter as fathers battled it out to win the Aldi Mamia Best Dad Joke competition. Stand-up comedian Mark Watson was enlisted to judge the competition and picked father of 2, Austin May from Bedworth, Warwickshire, as the overall winner. Stand-up comedian Mark Watson was enlisted to judge the competition and picked father of 2, Austin May from Bedworth, Warwickshire, as the overall winner. Now his joke, which I'm sure you want to hear, is, I once had a limo, but when it arrived, the guy driving it walked off. I said, excuse me, are you not going to drive me? The guy told me that the price didn't include a driver, so I'd spent £400 on a limo and I have nothing to show for it. Get it? Chauffeur. it. I guess it's all in the delivery, and I'm sure Austin delivered it better than that. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
How about this one from Mal Lindley? Hi, George. Hope you're well. I'm watching your show again from Perth, Western Australia, live on YouTube. I wake up every Monday morning at 2 a.m. Perth time to watch your show. Keep up the great work, and I wish you well in your upcoming tasks. Thank you very much, Mal, and to all our friends down under, a big hello. Tony says, last Monday, Labour joined the Conservatives in voting to postpone the end of COVID restrictions and so-called Freedom Day. Last Thursday, both parties collapsed in Chesham and Amersham. What do you think? I can't separate the two outcomes. All the best, Tony. I think you're right. I think the Tories paid a price for reneging on their promise to the British people to lift the restrictions when they promised that they would. I think they also paid a price for HS2. I think they also paid a price for the way that they have been handling the pandemic, the vaccination program notwithstanding. There's a limit to how much of a vaccine bounce you can have when people begin to calibrate their losses. But the best part of the Amersham and Chesham by-election for me was that Labour got 622 votes. Last time, they got 7,000 votes under Jeremy Corbyn, and the time before that, again under Jeremy Corbyn, they got 11,000 votes. From 11,000 to 622 shows how far Labour under Keir Starmer has fallen. Now, the second poll is up there. Is it time to stop taking the knee? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, my good friend and colleague Rachel Blevins works with me on RT America. I work every night on RT America at 7 o'clock UK time. It's always worth watching, and it's especially worth watching when Rachel Blevins is on with me. Rachel, welcome back to the show. Always great to talk with you. What's rattling in the American media world this week?
It's great to be back on with you, George. You know, it has been a crazy week after watching President Biden go on sort of his tour of diplomatic talks over the last week. And so I think now we're kind of watching him cool off from that. And we are watching essentially that he survived that. I mean, he got through all of the talks. He got through his meeting with President Putin. And I think earlier this week, you really said it best when you pointed out that it will be a win for Biden, essentially, if his pants don't fall off at these meetings and specifically at that summit with Putin. And so I think that's exactly what we saw in the media coverage of it, was that they are going to take exactly what he said. They're going to focus on the parts of him saying that he is really going to be tough against Russia, against China. And that's what they're going to place as him sort of being this presidential president now that he is in office. And I think that that's the treatment that we are going to continue to see when it comes to him. And so as far as the media is concerned, it was a great week in U.S. politics, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
And presumably they never play the videos of him starting to wander off into the waves or fall off the end of the pier. They don't show his wife having to catch him like a toddler and turn him round and point him in the right direction. All of that is airbrushed out, is it, in the land of the free?
That it truly is. You know, we talk a lot about freedom of the press, but there wasn't a lot of coverage of the fact that when you looked at Russian President Putin's press conference, he had journalists from all around. He had Russian journalists, American journalists. He took questions from CNN and from top mainstream media outlets that he's probably answered a dozen times before, but he sat there, he took their questions, he was patient with them, even when they asked him questions about things that we have yet to see proof of, you know, when it comes to these claims of cyber attacks or his political opponents or things of that sort. But when it came to Biden, he was not allowed to be asked questions by any Russian journalist or really anyone who was actually going to challenge him. So it's interesting how not only do they airbrush out things that would make him look less strong and less powerful, but they actually make sure that he has his softball questions lined up for when he does do any sort of a live press conference where he's talking to the public.
Yeah, all in the name of freedom and liberty, of course. One of the most hilarious was the passage in which he invited the public to imagine what it would be like if America went around the world interfering in other people's elections, in other people's business. I mean, you're too young to remember the Rowan and Martin laugh-in, but that was kind of like what it was, a man stating the most perfectly absurd nonsense as if it were the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly. And, you know, it's crazy because it almost makes you wonder if he wholeheartedly believed what he was saying. Because, I mean, we've gotten the Joe Biden who said that he's been around for 150 years. We've gotten the Joe Biden who it seems like he's got a different personality every single day that he's up there. So if he's up there saying, imagine that the rest of the world would accuse the U.S. of interfering in democracies, I mean, maybe the Joe Biden of that day actually did believe that. But, I mean, it's a wake-up call to anyone else who's watching and going, wait a second, aren't you talking about what the United States has a very long and well-established track record of doing and is still trying to do all around the world? They're just doing it a little bit more covertly now.
Now, one of the things you said last week has been intriguing me, that the media is beginning to turn a little sour for the vice president, Kamala Harris. They've been beginning to criticize her, even attack her. What's the meaning of that, do you think?
You know, that's a good question. And I was almost just as surprised by looking at this coverage because now we're seeing her referred to as the problem with the Democratic Party and exactly what's wrong with the Biden administration. And I feel like that could go a number of ways. I mean, in a sense, it could keep her from being able to run whenever Biden's term is over. If Biden finishes out his term and they decide that, you know, he's still just able enough to get through another 4 years, then they could be teeing him up to go on to then run again and just hope that the Republicans aren't going to put up anyone who is really going to challenge him. But at the same time, it also gives them someone to blame in all of this. You know, when they take someone like Kamala Harris and they assign her the problems at the U.S. border, they say, okay, you deal with immigration. Well, the reality is that there is no simple, perfect answer when it comes to U.S. immigration. I mean, we've seen that from politicians of both sides. No one seems to be able to exactly figure it out. So when they just throw it at her, someone who has no experience with this, it looks like they are setting her up to fail. And I think that at the end of the day, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see exactly why they're doing that. But when it comes to their motives, you would think that they would want the entire Biden administration to look like they are perfectly cohesive. And so I think that if they really are trying to put so much negativity on her, then there has to be a reason for it at the end of the day.
And what about in the right-wing media, Rachel? I mean, Fox News, if Fox News is the antithesis of MSNBC or CNN, what's their output like nowadays? Are they giving Biden an easy ride? Are they hankering after a change of power? Or have they buckled down to live with the people who are in power now?
Well, I think the tricky thing that Fox News is going through is a lot of what the Republican Party is going through is that they see the anger and the frustration with the majority of the people in the Republican Party, the majority of the people who supported Trump. And so I think they're kind of in that place of still trying to figure out their way. But one of the things we have to remember when it comes to mainstream media here in the US, whether it's Fox News or it's CNN, the one thing they have in common is that they don't really challenge the United States government because they don't want to lose their access. They don't want to make it look like they are unpatriotic and un-American. So whenever they're watching Democrats and Republicans come together to pass, $700 billion in defense funding, they're right there cheering them along with it. They're not asking about why the United States is still complicit in bombing in Yemen. They're not asking why the U.S. still has troops all across the Middle East when they are there illegally. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that we live in this world where we think that Fox News and CNN are on opposite ends of the spectrum because one of them may be more critical of Trump, or they may be more critical of Biden. But at the same time, just like the Democrats and Republicans in Congress, they still have so much in common. And yet they trick people into thinking that they are two sides of the spectrum, so to speak.
Finally, and I'll ask you this every week because we miss the comedy value, if nothing else. What's Donald Trump been doing this week?
That's a great question. I really wish I knew the answer to that. It's so funny how they managed to literally wipe him off of Facebook, off of Twitter, off of every kind of social media. He promised that he was going to have some sort of platform, and it's like he is losing his shot here because he has people across the country who want to hear from him, and his interviews really just are not getting that much traction. And so I think, if anything, that question of what Donald Trump is doing remains, but it also serves as a reminder that this year, the mainstream media and all of the top social media companies learned something very important, which is that they can take a figure who is so polarizing and who commands so much of U.S. politics, and they can pretty much just silence him and make it as if he doesn't even exist anymore. And that is a very powerful lesson that they are certainly keeping in mind, especially as we move forward and especially as more politicians actually do maybe possibly try to challenge the U.S. status quo.
It is perplexing, surprising, odd that having marched 70+ million people to the top of the hill, he appears to have marched them down again. He could easily have found investors to set up an alternative to Twitter, an alternative to Facebook. Could have started his own television station, his own cable network news. The cost of entry into these things is no longer prohibitive, at least for the kind of people that he runs around with. Why do you think he's not done that?
I wonder about that too, honestly, because we are in the perfect time for something like that to happen. We're at a time when Facebook and Twitter are censoring like never before. We're at a time when they are blocking people from both the left and the right. I mean, this is something that is felt all around. I know I've dealt with this. I know you've dealt with this. And a number of people who work in independent media have found themselves being censored in one way or another, who have found their reach being limited. And so now would be the perfect time for Trump to come out with something like this. And so it almost makes you wonder, who is in his ear right now? What is his team telling him? And why are they telling him that now isn't the time to get out there? Or are they putting some sort of date forward? Because I know we heard with Facebook this week that they were saying that Trump's ban was going to last for the next 2 years. So it could be one of those cases where he's looking at all of the funding that's needed and then deciding, okay, we'll wait, for the next 2 years. But at the same time, with as quickly as Facebook is going downhill right now, it really makes you wonder whether or not they're going to be around in 2 years and whether or not that is going to be a viable social media site for Trump to actually join back on. So I think I would like to know who he's talking to and what his advisors are saying.
Fascinating. Thank you, Rachel, as always. See you next week, God willing. Thanks for joining us. Now, here's my next question. It is, in this week in 1925, the film Gold Rush came out. In it, Charlie Chaplin eats a shoe. What was it really made of? A, licorice, B, pastry, C, chocolate. What a good question. You'll get the answer right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Hey you, do you want to know more of what's happening in the world right now? Of course you do. But getting to the heart of the story? Well, that's going to take some hard work. That's why here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we've created that program just for you, hosted by one of the world's most sagacious minds. Get a perspective, an education on stories from all around the world, dissected and discussed with you. Join our debate, vote in our polls on Twitter, tweet a question to George, or call in now to give us your perspective on the stories the rest of the world simply isn't talking about. Join the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees, hosted by one of the world's greatest orators. The Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway. Let's make sense of the world together.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The shoe that was eaten by Charlie Chaplin in Gold Rush in 1925, amazing, almost 100 years ago, was made of licorice. Let's take some calls. Wayne is in Cheshire. Go ahead, Wayne.
Always a pleasure. I want to speak about the young lady that was stuck in Iraq. I think she should be let back. I think we should build a number of resettlement centres where we can re-educate. But mainly, I want to hear from her on talk shows, obviously with guards around her, what the problem is, why she went, and other similar people, terrorists, when they've been caught by the police, they always get shot and never have a chance to speak, even when they can shoot the legs and interrogate them. I want to know, I want to have a debate so we can learn, they can learn themselves, society can understand what the problem is and what's going on.
Well, she went to join a mass murdering death cult. I'm not sure I want to hear her on a chat show explaining what the problem was that drove her there. But I do think that the possibility of using genuinely repentant terrorists as poster boys or poster girls against terrorism, to talk against terrorism, dissuade others from going down that road, is sometimes a good idea. But there are other examples, like the murderer on London Bridge not so long ago, is an example of someone that the authorities thought had been de-radicalized, that turned out merely to have been biding his time to murder innocent people who were trying to help him, actually, help him in his rehabilitation. Go ahead, Wayne, last word.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but unless we start this process, we won't get anywhere.
Okay, thanks for the point. Martin is in Portsmouth. Go ahead, Martin.
Hello, George. I've listened to you for a long time now.
Thank you.
And I wanted to say, whenever I'm feeling a bit down in the dumps, I like to watch that video of you in front of the Senate in the US of A.
That was my best day so far. I'm hoping for some even better days, Martin.
I was so proud of you that day, George.
Thank you.
You actually hammered them.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to ring you up and say, well done.
Thank you. Well, they made me, the law of unintended consequences, they made me quite big in America. Hence, I'm on American television every night. Hence, there's people watching and listening to this show all over America. So it definitely backfired. Thank you, Martin, for that. Any other point you want to make before I say goodnight?
No, keep up the good work, George. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Most kind of you to call up to say that. Yvonne Tracy in New Malden says, perhaps the person who first decided to take the knee at football matches should now say the time has come to stop it. After 10 weeks, we stopped clapping for the NHS. but we still all respect those great workers for our country. Very, very well said, Yvonne. And Rob says the big difference between Kick It Out and BLM is that Kick It Out identified very early on that the majority of people and football fans were decent, and the problem was a minority. This allowed them to work on the same side of the decent people to defeat the minority. BLM are trying to tar everyone with the same brush. It's completely unreasonable, wrong, and destined to fail. Thank you, Rob, for that so much. Here, Retro says, don't feel bad about it. If you've been fooled by Farage, you're not the only one. Just get on side and equate footballers taking the knee with the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I don't even know what you're talking about. That was a caller that said that. And Stuart says people should be allowed to do what they like as long as they do not hurt or impair anyone else. And Proper Democrat says it should never have started. It has achieved absolutely nothing for either the cause or for football, but it has divided the players from their fan base. Totally counterproductive. And Atomic says virtue signalling is tedious, but the booing is just giving a bunch of overpaid ball kickers a sense of self-righteousness. Let them kneel if they want. They'll soon get bored if there's no reaction at all. Let's take a call from Mark in North Carolina. Mark, go ahead, sir.
Hey, how you doing here, George?
All good. Nice to hear from you. Go on.
Okay, first of all, I want to congratulate the great Roger Waters for what he said to Zuckerberg, that oligarchs.
It was wonderful, wasn't it?
It sure was. It was awesome. It was awesome. I mean, he called the hypocrisy of Zuckerberg, who actually should have been the object of that song. If he was, I guess he wasn't around at the time when the song was made.
No,
but,
it was long before he was born, unfortunately, Mark. Yeah. There's only thee and me even remember it when it was first released.
By the way, I just got back on Facebook. I was suspended again for 30 days, and I posted
What was your crime?
They just don't like the fact that I talk against all that politically correct crap. I talk against the lockdowns. I talk against the vaccine. I talk against the election. I think it's a stolen election, and that's what I wanted to mention to you next.
Yeah.
I'm kind of disappointed in President Putin. I think he should have told Biden what he is, that he's an imposter and the recipient of a stolen election, and he has no right to talk to anybody about, freedom or elections or anything else. And there is a big, right now in this country, there is a very large, which say not only a recon, they're actually going through with a fine tooth comb on every part of the election, especially in Arizona. An audit. There's actually an actual audit of the election, and it's showing the fraud already. Georgia's about to do an audit of its own. Other states are about to do audits. I think what's going to happen, because I'm 100% sure this election was stolen. It's not that I'm a big Trump fan. I'm not. I just think Trump was the lesser of two evils. But I know I know a thief when I see it. I know what a theft when I see it. I mean, there's no question that election was stolen. And I believe it's going to be proven. Now, what's going to happen after that, I don't know. It may go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court takes it. But there's nothing in the Constitution calling for this, because this would take more than just being able to impeach him. They would have to impeach the entire administration, or what I call the regime. They'd have to impeach the entire regime. And I don't know if the Supreme Court has the power to order something like that, or whether the government would carry that out in the first place. But it would take all legitimacy away from this regime.
Well, of course, President Putin is the president of a great country, and he cannot do the thing that you wish he had done. It's not a matter for him who's the President of the United States, and it oughtn't to be a matter for the United States who's the President of Russia. I read today, again, I knew it already, but I reread it, how Bush the first intervened in the coup in Russia on behalf of Boris Yeltsin. So America did actually pick the President of Russia in the time of Yeltsin, but now they have a tougher nut to crack with Putin. So you can't ask Russia to do that. But I'm interested in what you say. These audits, are they getting much coverage in the U.S. media, Mark?
Well, not in the so-called mainstream, what I call the corporate media, of course not. But nobody watches the corporate media anymore, except people like, retirees, maybe in the 80s and 90s. But for the most part, most people don't get their news. I certainly don't. And anybody I know that doesn't from the corporate media. We get it on alternate media. There's so many different ways you can get the news right now. You can get it from a guy like Stephen K. Bannon's War Room. You can get it from, I know you don't like Alex Jones, even though I actually found out about you through Alex Jones when you actually appeared in his show. I thought it was a great show, but I guess you guys had a fallout since.
No, it's not a question of fallout. I think he's done some really terrible things.
He's done some good things, too. He's brought some good things to light. Okay? A lot of stuff I didn't know about.
Like accusing the parents of children murdered in a massacre of having faked the whole thing.
Well, he didn't actually say that. He questioned it. But so did people, But I don't even want to get into that because, I have questions about anything that ever happened from the time JFK was killed, and even questioning, I don't know if you ever heard of Operation Northwoods, when they tried to
Yes,
blame
of course,
Castro.
I have. And in fact, you and I have spoken about it before. Mark, thanks for the call. Sorry it's brief. I need to leave time for our very own irrepressible superstar, looking increasingly like Cristiano Ronaldo, Patrick Christys. Patrick, welcome back to the show. Let me ask you, I know I asked you last week, but I talked about it earlier tonight, and I want your take on it. Why is GB News still, 1 week on, a technical disaster area? How do you spend millions of pounds to launch a TV station that doesn't properly work?
Well, what they did was hire a lot of people in the production side of things who are radio producers, and very successful radio producers have produced very big shows on very high-profile stations. But there is a difference between television and radio. A lot of the time, that difference is another zero in your paycheck. But unfortunately, sometimes the difference is knowing what does it on TV and doesn't in a very technical sense. And this is an issue they've also employed, but which is all power to them, some people who have not had a huge amount of experience actually as a television presenter. Now, the likes of McCoy, the likes of Brazier, who previously I had no deep affinity for, don't get me wrong, I thought they were absolutely fine, are now showing exactly how good they are as television presenters. Because, not to be fair with Simon McCoy, because Alex Phillips is good alongside him, but in terms of Brazier and others, the people they've got alongside them, the presenters, the front of house, they're not a lot of established names in the television industry. So when you introduce people who've not presented TV before, what you absolutely don't need alongside it is people who've never produced TV before. And when you bring those two things together, it can become a little bit difficult and it can become a little bit embarrassing. What I will say, and this is important, is the audience is still there. And they, I think, possibly have another couple of weeks in the bank.
Yeah, I agree. And I still believe that it will, in the end, succeed because the audience is there. But what do you make of the attempts to strangle it at birth by the advertising industry and by some very big landmark companies who ostentatiously withdrew their advertising on grounds of stopping hate when they could not possibly adumbrate a single example in which the station has been guilty of spreading hate.
Yeah, and this is the point, isn't it? That actually there's a lot to unpack here. Firstly, there's the deep irony of people who have decided already they're going to be deeply offended by something, watches hours unstopped of something to find what it is they're offended by. Then they're lobbying the advertisers. Now, I think a big concern is that it takes maybe one or two people on Twitter to get in touch with IKEA, a company who, if people check this out, was founded by a bloke who wasn't a particularly nice chap.
He was a Nazi collaborator.
Thank you very much, George, for saying something I assumed that I maybe couldn't. But it is true, so why didn't I? But anyway, so that, right? Also, companies like Kopparberg. Now, I like a Kopparberg as much as the next man, which I imagine is not.
What is that? Is that alcohol?
It's a Kopparberg. It's a weak cider, George. So I don't imagine you've ever tried it.
No.
But how many people are alcoholics and stuff like that? How many people have been done for drink drive? The idea that an alcohol-infused company is a moral bastion of goodness in the world is a total nonsense, right? So there's that. But there's two things there. First and foremost, your companies aren't great to start with, so stop it. Secondly, it's only been a couple of people on Twitter who've had a pop at you, and if that's all it takes to get something cancelled, then that's a concern. Look, I think it's a nonsense. I hope the tide is turning, and I thought Andrew Neil was right, and I think he has to do this, by the way. I think he was right to say, all right then, when it's a success, when, not if, when it's a success, don't come crawling back. And you know what? I imagine they'll come crawling back rather sharpish.
Yeah, I mean, IKEA, faced with a boycott of its own because of its boycott, quickly took fright and said, well, you know, we may look at this again. I myself am now boycotting IKEA.
Yeah.
I should have always boycotted it because of its antecedents. But I'll never go back there, and I'll never assemble another flat pack or eat another Swedish meatball again.
Well, even if you didn't care that the guy who founded IKEA was a Nazi, even if you didn't care that sometimes there might have been a little bit of horse in your meatball, we should definitely care about the fact that they make us assemble our own furniture. And that alone is enough to boycott IKEA. And I think it's brought it to a head. If there's one good thing to come out of GB News, George, it's the fact that we're now seeing the light. Just go to John Lewis, you know?
Exactly. Now, what about the political scene? What's happening there, Patrick? But I mean this genuinely. I have no idea what's happening because my nose is right at the grindstone for reasons that you know about. And I see only the local picture, not the big one. So educate me. What happened this week in British politics?
Well, there was a couple of big things. Firstly, there was the election results in Chesham and Amersham, previously a Tory seat with a 16,000, to be precise, 223 majority, formerly by the Tory MP Cheryl Gillan, who unfortunately died from cancer in April. Now, that result was overturned, and overturned properly, by the Liberal Democrat, Sarah Green, who did an absolute number on them. Now, it's interesting, this really, because that's obviously, it's a southern seat, right? So we talk about the red wall, don't we, with the Tories. There's a big focus on the red wall with the Conservative Party and what they need to do, like, you know, bring a business hub to Hartlepool and you'll keep the Northerners happy. Well, actually, this should have been a safe seat. And the reason why the Tory majority got overturned was because local opposition to HS2, which is going to rip through that area. Also, what's going to happen is planning reforms, essentially build more on the green belt, of which this is. It's the urban sprawl of London in that area. Now, both of those things, you can argue, aren't particularly, or traditionally, not particularly Conservative Party policies. Now, the Conservative Party was willing to let those go, and they got served the receipts in a very big way. And I think this is interesting. The other thing that you will not hear, which is a massive factor, and you will not hear this on any BBC report, is the fact that the Lib Dems have been what I would call relatively sound on lockdown, i.e. they don't really want it on account of our civil... They've been remarkably Liberal Democrat about the whole lockdown thing in a way that you would have thought the Conservatives wouldn't have been. And so this is potent kind of trifecta of disaster for the Tories that has led to it. Now, this is the issue, isn't it? Which is that actually, could the Tories see this happening in the long run? The argument to that would be that actually the main opposition should be the Labour Party. And in this by-election, the Labour Party secured a grand total, George, of 622 votes. They have more members in that constituency than they got votes, which means that some actual Labour members either decided to vote for someone else or not vote at all, which is pretty bad. The other big thing that's happened politically this week, George, I would argue, is, well, there's been quite a lot to be fair, but one of them is that John Bercow's defected to the Tory party. Now, I was surprised to hear that as breaking news because I assumed he'd done that a while ago. But no, it turns out he's done it now. The minute silence for John Bercow's departure from the Conservative Party, the morning of the loss of Bercow, was, as you can imagine, interrupted by cheering.
And I'm not sure that his defection to Keir Starmer's Labour Party, given his role in seeking to cheat the British people out of the Brexit for which they voted, is necessarily going to help Keir Starmer rebuild that red wall.
It's the thing, isn't it? It's the fact that he's defected to this version of the Labour Party as well, Keir Starmer's version, which basically means nothing. I know nothing about this Labour Party. The only thing I know about it is the fact they've still got the same logo they've had for the last 10 years. That's the only thing I know about Keir's. So if you're going to defect to a Labour Party, like, this is the worst one you could possibly have a bang at. And
maybe he's got some political ambitions. Maybe Labour would be 20 points ahead if John Bercow was its leader.
What I would say is, I think actually there's something desperately sad about this whole thing, which is that the convention is that the leader of the House of Commons, the Speaker of the House of Commons, normally goes into the Lords, right? And there is an argument for the fact that you should have allowed that to happen because that is convention. The argument on the other side, which is the argument that ultimately won the day, is that John Bercow, as Speaker, broke so many conventions.
He abused the position.
Which he did do, right? So it's whether or not two broken conventions make a right, you know? So, but, you know, I wouldn't have honoured him. So there's that issue. Now, I think this is a man scorned, isn't it? This is a man scorned. Now, he likes to be in the public eye. He clearly did. That came across. And he wasn't. And now he is again for a day or two. But I agree with you. I don't think this does the Labour Party any favours. If the Labour Party wants to win the red wall back, which it literally needs to do if it's going to win a general election, John Bercow's not your man, right? It doesn't take enough focus groups that Keir Starmer's doing to tell you what roughly, very roughly, what you need to do to bring the red wall back. Don't take the knee, at least pretend to like the Queen, and then deliver Brexit. Now, I'm not sure John Bercow is on the right side of any of that stuff. And so I don't think Bercow to Labour is not a big win for Starmer, is it?
Incidentally, I read, I don't know if it's true, that the Liberal Democrats supported HS2, and yet are the beneficiaries of a huge backlash on HS2. Is that right?
It's interesting, yeah, because this is why politics is nuts, isn't it? Because actually, crucially, the Lib Dems aren't the one delivering HS2, are they? So they can get away with it. Now, I happen to have driven through Chesham and indeed Amersham recently, very recently, and there's a big bypass that you go on, a dual carriageway, and then you turn right at the roundabout, and you're in Amersham. And there's a road sign there that says, get this, expect delays until 2028, right? Which I think is more than enough to ask of any road user. And that reason is because they're building HS2. There's also massive issues with property development in those areas. A lot of people bought a house enough outside London where you could literally afford to buy a house, and now they've been confronted by the fact that the park you looked out on has been approved for planning permission, and that's going to be £1,000. Now, people get annoyed about that. Now, they can't have done because the Lib Dems won. They can't have looked into what the Liberal Democrats' actual policies on both of those things were. What served the Lib Dems well is the fact that they actually weren't the party delivering after that happened, and that's why we are where we are.
Finally, have you recovered from Scotland's 0-0 victory at Wembley the other night?
I wondered how long. Your producer spoke to me earlier. He went, have you recovered from it? And I thought, you know what? You're treating it as a win. I tell you what I've not recovered from, and I don't want to recover from, actually. I was bang in favour. If people have dug the Scots out for what they did in Hyde Park, and I'm bang in favour a little bit of celebratory behaviour, shall we say. And I thought, look, you know what? The fact is, there's no excuse for England not beating Scotland, and we didn't beat you. And so you have every right to celebrate, George. Best result for independence, though. Best result for independence. If we'd have thumped you, Sturgeon would be saying, off we go, and she'd be out there. If you'd have beaten us, the grass would start looking greener on the other side. A good British 0-0, George.
Scotland and England can never be separated, even on the football park. Patrick Christy, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now I've got some calls. I need to squeeze them in. Chris is in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, congratulations on that draw.
Yeah, it was a fighting 0-0 victory.
Yeah. I just one of the main stories of the week I thought was carers being almost forced to take the jab, and people seem to have short memories. I know in 2009 with the swine flu rollout with the vaccine, that caused narcolepsy in children and NHS staff, so that's why a lot of them are very wary of taking the jab. And, you know, people need...
Have they been forced, Chris, or is there just talk of them being forced?
Well, they're talking about in 16 weeks they'll lose their job if they don't take it, so it's coercion. If we look at the Nuremberg codes, which was set up because people were experimented on in Buchenwald, places like that, the Nuremberg codes were set up to make sure people had full informed consent. If we read through all of them, we're breaking them by what we're doing. We've got no long-term data on these jabs, and we've seen what's happened in the past with thalidomide, with the swine flu, both and 1976. And that was pulled after like 53 deaths, whereas on the yellow card system, we've had 1,300 deaths in the UK, like 5,000 in the US, 10,000 in Europe.
Caused by the vaccine?
Yeah, according to the statistics, yes.
1,300 have been killed by the vaccine. Where'd you get that figure from?
On the government's yellow card system, the MHRA.
It says that 1,300 people have been killed by the vaccine.
Yeah.
Well, I'll need to look that up because that's news to me. Exceedingly unlikely news. Chris, thanks. Michael is in Liverpool on the Shamima Begum. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, George. I just wanted to talk about the poll. I just thought they were shocking results, really.
Yeah.
For the people
I think
saying
that's
yes,
where the
yes and no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about shocking. It certainly wasn't surprising to me.
For the amount of people saying yes, and I do understand that. But
I think
really, she should be brought home. She's
any
a British
government
citizen.
that tried to bring her home now would be risking a lot of political damage, I think.
You're correct, George, but that's a lot because of the propaganda that the Tories have put behind this.
Well, it's not propaganda that she went and became an ISIS bride
no, 100%,
in Syria.
But it's not propaganda either that she was born here and she's gone and committed these crimes. We need to get to the bottom of how 15-year-old girls can be convinced to go out.
And she wasn't alone either. There were other 15-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly right. And to get to the bottom of it is by calling them home to be arrested and tried as terrorists. And it's just crazy because they put that out there to say, oh no, we've got rid of her citizenship, so she won't be back. It's the big tough man. But then in reality, that just splits to people for, I'll get behind that.
If I may claim some prescience, I opposed the law. I was quite lonely in the opposition lobby that allowed the British government to take the citizenship away from British citizens that had been born here. That seemed to me then a wholly unacceptable idea. I'm not against taking citizenship away from people who were born elsewhere and we gave citizenship to. I could think of high-profile terrorists that had ended up with British citizenship but hadn't originally been British citizens. But in the case of Begum, she was born here, so she was born a British citizen. And it seems to me that taking away the citizenship of someone who was born here is to give a government, a here today, gone tomorrow government, far too much power. Last word to you, Michael.
It's the fact that it needs to be a trial to get to the bottom of these facts, you know, whether she was trafficked there, and, you know, whether it was much, you know, coercion and things like that. How it comes about, that can only be done in a trial, but they're not interested in that. That's why they will reject the citizenship, because they want the spectacle to be that, for people to get behind them for that, and then the other half of people going, oh no, she should be brought back to go on a talk show. Like, no, she's what she's done should be brought back and trialed, so we can get to the bottom of exactly what's happened.
Powerful call. Powerful call, Michael, in Liverpool. Thank you. Julian is in London. Let's hear from him. Julian, welcome.
Hi, George. Happy Father's Day. All your kids are lucky to have a dad like you.
Thank you. I got a lot of cards, Julian.
Oh, lovely. Well, I got my first bunch of flowers, and I've got my 4-month-old boy here, and he's making me feel very special.
How wonderful. Now you're a father. That's wonderful news.
Thank you. Praise be to God. A friend and I had the misfortune of being mistaken for a Shamima Begum type jihadist outfit, because we were teaching refugees boxing in Lebanon. And we were detained for a couple of days, and, nothing was found, and we were let go. But let's say we had been up to no good in Lebanon, wouldn't we have had to face trial out there? And it isn't bringing Shamima Begum back here undermining Syria, as if Syria hasn't been undermined.
Of course, that isn't even an option, because we are effectively at war with Syria. We are not fighting Syria for the moment, but we were bombing Syria not that long ago. And whatever you think of any country's government, I'm never going to support our country bombing them. I think every country has the right to overthrow its government, including Syria, but they've not got the right to ask me to support my country bombing theirs in order to bring that about.
Absolutely. Well, this country also supported people like Shamima Begum going.
Well, that's a very good point, a very powerful point, Julian. Actually, objectively, we were on the side of Shamima Begum. We were dropping bombs as the Air Force for the Shamima Begums. And that's a point that nobody in Britain really wants to hear. Julian, thanks for the call.
Right.
Happy Father's Day to you. It's the legend, Norma, in Bristol. On the same subject, actually. Norma, give us your wisdom.
Pardon?
Give us your words of wisdom.
Oh, well, I might not be popular with a bigger percentage of your poll, but with Shamima Begum, I did agree with Andrew Durry, and I think she should have the right to return.
Do you think she should be tried here?
Yeah, there's a Christian value. It's called redemption, and, I might be a bit soft, but there's so many people that are so judgmental. I know it was terrible joining ISIS. I know it was a big mistake. And she knows a lot of people hate her. But eventually, after she's brought back and tried, her family would take her back. And you know what worries me, George, is that her life would probably be vilified by thousands, and she would mentally suffer anyway. Because she's had 3 babies. They've all died. And after all, due justice, yes, but kindness, I think, can warm people's hearts. And I do think what I've just said, really.
It's a powerful case that you make, and the Christian value of redemption is an admirable one. I think the problem many people have is whether you can trust that the person has truly redeemed themselves, or whether they'll end up like the murderer on London Bridge, having pretended redemption, penitence, but in fact merely been nursing their wrath for the opportunity to commit the same sin over again. What do you think, Norma?
Well, she was a 15, 16-year-old girl. She's
That's
now
the powerful.
21.
That's the most powerful point.
I mean,
she was actually a child. She was 1 year older than my oldest son, and that's a kid. Believe me.
Well, I mean, the fact is, like that Andrew Durry said, she's a very timid girl now, and give her the benefit of the doubt, and people just stop being so horrible about her.
Norma in Bristol, the legend. has spoken. Now, don't forget, you can download the podcast of this program, a finely edited highlights version of this 3-hour epic from tomorrow. Search Moats, M-O-A-T-S, on the app where you get your podcast from. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode or a download. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, the same place. Good night.